Duper's delight. Watch someone lie to your face. If you look closely, you might catch it. A flicker. A brief smile crossing their lips right as the lie comes out. It's there and gone in a second, but it's real. They're enjoying this. This is Duper's delight. The quiet thrill that comes from getting away with deception. It's not about the lie itself. It's about the rush of control. The deceiver knows something you don't. They're bending reality to fit their version, and there's a pleasure in that power they can't quite hide. You see it everywhere once you know to look. A colleague takes credit for your work in a meeting. As everyone congratulates them, watch their face. There's that subtle satisfaction. A partner denies something you both know happened. Even as they reassure you, something almost playful flickers beneath the surface. The tell isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's microscopic. A tiny shift around the eyes. A barely perceptible change in tone. But it's there, because deception, when it works, delivers a reward. The mechanism is simple. Successfully lying creates a sense of superiority. The deceiver feels clever. In control. One step ahead. It's the same feeling that comes from winning, except here. The game is your perception of reality, and you don't know you're playing. Every time they twist the truth and you accept it, their brain registers a small victory. Victories feel good. What makes this dangerous isn't the smile. It's what it reveals. Someone experiencing Duper's delight isn't lying out of necessity. They're lying because they like it. They've crossed a line. Deception has shifted from tool to entertainment. And once that happens, the lies don't stop. They escalate. The thrill fades, and bigger deceptions are needed to recreate that first rush. Think of high-stakes poker. The player who can't control that flicker of satisfaction when they're bluffing. Interrogators watch for it. Negotiators recognize it as overconfidence. Because when someone feels Duper's delight, they stop being careful. They savor the moment. And that split second of satisfaction gives them away. But in everyday life, most people miss it completely. We're not trained to spot these signals. We assume honesty. We take words at face value. That assumption is exactly what keeps the pattern going. The liar gets their thrill. You stay unaware. The cycle continues until something breaks it. The unsettling part is how common this is. Small deceptions happen constantly. At work, in relationships, in casual conversations, and every successful one delivers that tiny hit of satisfaction. Most people never become compulsive liars, but some do. It starts with that first flicker when the lie lands and no one catches it. Truth buyers. Someone walks up to you. They introduce themselves, tell you where they're from, what they do, why they're here. You believe them. Not because you checked. Not because you have proof. You believe them because your brain assumes people tell the truth unless proven otherwise. This is truth bias, the automatic tendency to accept information as honest without questioning it. It's not naivety. It's how human minds are built. Doubting everything would be exhausting, socially crippling, functionally impossible. So your brain takes a shortcut. It treats honesty as the default and only switches to skepticism when something forces it to. The effect runs deeper than you'd think. Researchers showed people videos of others lying or telling the truth. Even when participants were told half the statements were false, even when warned to be skeptical, their accuracy barely rose above random chance. They still defaulted to belief. The mind resists suspicion. It wants to trust because trust is efficient. Questioning takes effort, creates friction, disrupts the flow. That efficiency has a cost. In relationships, truth bias is why gaslighting works. Someone denies what you saw, what you heard, what you remember. And even though you know what happened, part of your brain considers their version. They're saying it with conviction. Your default is to process it as potentially true. The doubt creeps in not because their argument is strong, but because your mind is wired to give statements the benefit of belief. At work, it's why fraud goes unnoticed for years. You don't suspect the friendly coworker because nothing about them signals dishonesty. The bias blinds you to what's happening in front of you. Warning signs get explained away. Inconsistencies become honest mistakes. The deception continues because your brain keeps returning to trust. The effect magnifies in small moments. A stranger asks for directions. You help. A salesperson explains a product. You listen without assuming lies. A friend cancels plans with an excuse. You take it at face value. Most of the time, truth bias serves you well. Most people, most of the time, are honest. The bias is useful because constant suspicion would make normal life unbearable, but it creates a gap. Manipulators know this. They understand that the first version of events you hear tends to stick. Once your brain accepts something as true, dislodging that belief takes far more effort than installing it did. So they move fast. Establish their narrative early. By the time contradictions surface, your mind has already locked onto their version. The truth starts to feel like the lie. Truth bias doesn't make you gullible. It makes you human. The system works because most communication is honest. But when it isn't, the same mechanism that makes interaction possible becomes the tool that makes deception effective. You believe because believing is easier. And by the time you have reason to doubt, the lie has already settled in. Self-deception. You didn't fail. The system was rigged. You didn't mess up. They misunderstood your intentions. You're not avoiding the problem. You're just waiting for the right moment. The explanation feels reasonable, logical, even. And if you repeat it enough times, it stops feeling like an excuse. It starts feeling like truth. Self-deception isn't lying to others. It's lying to yourself so convincingly that you forget it's a lie. The mind doesn't just accept false beliefs. It actively constructs them, then hides the construction process. You become both the deceiver and the deceived, and the line between the two disappears entirely. Here's how it operates. You make a choice. Maybe it's selfish. Maybe it conflicts with your values. Maybe it hurts someone. Your mind immediately goes to work rationalizing it. Not because you're weak. Because cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding contradictory beliefs, is psychologically painful. The brain wants consistency, so it rewrites the story until the contradiction vanishes. A manager passes over a qualified candidate because of an unconscious bias. They don't think, "I discriminated." They think, "That other person was a better culture fit." The explanation arrives fully formed. It feels true because their brain made it true. The original bias never registers. It's been smoothed away, replaced with a narrative that protects their self-image. Relationships run on this constantly. You snap at your partner after a bad day. You don't tell yourself, "I took my frustration out on them." You tell yourself, "They were being difficult. I was just responding." The justification comes so fast it feels like perception, not construction. You genuinely believe it. And because you believe it, you can say it with full conviction. The trap deepens when self-deception becomes habitual. Each small lie to yourself makes the next one easier. Your baseline shifts. Actions you once recognized as wrong now feel justified. Behaviors you'd condemn in others seem reasonable when you're the one doing them. You're not becoming dishonest. You're becoming blind. What makes this so effective is that self-deception doesn't feel like deception. It feels like clarity, like you're finally seeing things correctly. And that's why it's nearly impossible to catch in yourself. You can't see the lie because you've erased the evidence that it's a lie. The mind doesn't just fool you. It makes you complicit in the fooling, then hides your complicity from you. The most dangerous part isn't the initial self-deception. It's what happens after. You act on the false belief, make decisions based on it, defend it when challenged. And each time you do, the belief gets reinforced, the story gets stronger, and the distance between what happened and what you remember happening grows wider. Eventually, you can't find your way back to the truth even if you wanted to, because the map you're using was drawn by the lie. Leakage. She says she's fine, voice steady, face calm, but her hands won't stop moving, fidgeting with her phone, adjusting her hair, tapping the table, small gestures easy to miss. But they're there, and they're telling a different story than her words. This is leakage. The unintentional signals that slip through when someone's trying to control their presentation. It's not a conscious tell. It's the gap between what they want to project and what their body actually reveals. No matter how carefully someone manages their words, their nonverbal behavior leaks the truth. The mechanism is straightforward. When you lie or hide something, it takes mental effort. You have to construct the false narrative, monitor your words, and suppress the real response. That cognitive load is taxing. And under that pressure, control slips. Not everywhere, just in the places you're not actively managing. A micro-expression flashes across your face before you can stop it. Your voice changes pitch for a fraction of a second. Your posture shifts. These signals escape because you can't monitor everything at once. Picture a job interview. The candidate is asked about a gap in their resume. They've prepared an answer. It's smooth, confident, but right before they speak, there's a tiny pause. Their eyes shift left, their shoulders tense. The words are perfect, but the body hesitated. That hesitation is leakage. It's the truth trying to surface before the lie took over. Leakage shows up in relationships constantly. Your partner says they're not upset about dinner plans getting cancelled. But their jaw tightens. Their responses get shorter. They smile, but it doesn't reach their eyes. The verbal message says one thing. The nonverbal channel contradicts it. And most of the time, you feel the mismatch even if you can't articulate why. What makes leakage powerful is that it's hard to fake and harder to suppress. You can rehearse your words. You can control your facial expression. But managing every micro-movement, every vocal fluctuation, every autonomic response, all while maintaining a false narrative, is nearly impossible. Something always slips through. Skilled observers watch for these leaks. Not the obvious ones. The subtle ones. The momentary break in eye contact. The slight change in breathing. The incongruence between what's being said and how it's being said. They're not looking for proof of deception. They're looking for signals that something doesn't align. And when those signals cluster, when multiple channels leak at once, the pattern becomes unmistakable. But here's the complication. Leakage doesn't always mean deception. Stress leaks. Discomfort leaks. Even honesty, when it's hard to express, can produce the same signals. The body responds to emotional load, not just to lies. Which means leakage reveals tension, not necessarily dishonesty. You have to read it in context. Understand what's normal for the person. Watch for deviations from their baseline. Because everyone leaks. The question is what they're leaking and why. The real insight isn't that people can't hide their emotions perfectly. It's that the effort to hide creates its own signal. Control itself becomes visible. And that visibility is what gives them away. Plausible deniability. He didn't exactly promise anything. He said it would probably work out, that things were looking good, that he'd see what he could do. Vague enough that if it falls through, he can say he never committed. Specific enough that you heard it as a commitment. And when you confront him later, he'll act surprised you misunderstood. This is plausible deniability, the art of communicating in a way that lets you escape accountability. You send a message clearly enough to be understood, but ambiguously enough to deny later. It's not quite lying. It's building an exit before you even finish speaking. The tactic works because language is flexible. Words can carry implications without stating them directly. Tone and context do the heavy lifting. You want someone to believe X without actually saying X. So you say something close. Something that suggests X. And when they act on that suggestion, you point to what you literally said and claim they misread you. Politicians master this. Watch how they answer uncomfortable questions. Mistakes may have been made, no subject. No agent. The passive voice creates distance. Responsibility dissolves. They acknowledge the problem without accepting blame. If pressed, they can say they were speaking generally. They weren't admitting personal fault. The phrasing gives them room to retreat. In relationships, it sounds different but functions the same. I never said we were exclusive. Technically true, but they acted like you were. Introduced you as their partner. Made plans months ahead. Talked about the future. The behavior communicated exclusivity even if the words never did. And now they're hiding behind the literal meaning while ignoring everything else they signaled. At work, plausible deniability becomes strategy. A manager implies you're up for promotion without confirming it. You work harder, take on extra projects, based on that implication. When the promotion doesn't come, they say they only mentioned it as a possibility. You filled in the gaps yourself. They're not responsible for your interpretation. Except they knew exactly how you'd interpret it. That was the point. What makes this effective is that it weaponizes normal communication. We don't speak in legal contracts. We rely on implication, context, shared understanding. Plausible deniability exploits that. It takes the ambiguity that makes conversation flow and turns it into a shield. You communicate enough to get what you want, but not enough to be held to it. The structure is always the same. Create the impression. Let someone act on it. Then retreat to the literal words when convenient. The person feels manipulated, but they can't quite prove it. Because technically, nothing false was said. The deception happened in the space between what was stated and what was understood. And that space is always deniable. The cruelest part is how it shifts blame. You weren't lied to. You misunderstood. You read too much into it. You should have asked for clarification. The accountability flows backward. The person who crafted the ambiguity gets to act like the victim of your assumptions. And the more you try to pin them down, the more unreasonable you seem. Because they never actually promised anything. Deceiver's distrust. The person who lies the most trusts the least. They watch you for signs of deception. Question your explanations. Assume hidden motives behind straightforward actions. It's not paranoia. It's projection. They know how easy it is to deceive because they do it constantly. So they assume everyone else does too. This is Deceiver's distrust. The tendency for dishonest people to believe others are dishonest. It's a psychological mirror. When you lie habitually, you lose the ability to take anything at face value. Your baseline shifts. Honesty stops being the default assumption. Deception becomes the lens through which you see every interaction. The pattern is everywhere once you recognize it. The cheater who constantly accuses their partner of cheating. The embezzler who's convinced their coworkers are stealing. The liar who treats every statement as a potential manipulation. They're not detecting actual dishonesty. They're seeing their own behavior reflected back. And because they can't trust themselves, they can't trust anyone. Here's why it happens. When you deceive regularly, you become intimately familiar with how deception works. You know the tactics, the justifications, the small signals that give someone away. That knowledge doesn't stay compartmentalized. It colors everything. You start noticing gaps in other people's stories. Hesitations that might mean nothing. Contradictions that could be innocent mistakes. But to you they look like lies. Because that's what they'd be if you were the one speaking. The mechanism runs deeper than simple projection. Deception erodes your model of how people operate. Most honest people assume honesty because that's their lived experience. They tell the truth, so truth feels normal. But if you lie constantly, your experience tells you truth is a performance. Something people claim but don't actually practice. So when someone tells you the truth, it doesn't register as truth. It registers as a convincing lie. Relationships corrode under this. Your partner tells you they were at the gym. You check their location. Examine their clothes for inconsistencies. Ask follow-up questions designed to catch them in a contradiction. Not because they've given you reason to doubt. Because you can't imagine someone just being where they said they'd be. The distrust has nothing to do with them. It's entirely about you. But they're the ones who suffer for it. What makes this particularly destructive is the feedback loop it creates. The more you distrust, the more you monitor. The more you monitor, the more you find, even when there's nothing to find. Innocent behaviors start looking suspicious. Normal explanations seem like cover stories. And your distrust justifies itself. You're not paranoid. You're just seeing what's really there. Except what you're seeing is your own reflection. The irony is that deceiver's distrust doesn't protect you from being deceived. It does the opposite. You're so busy looking for elaborate schemes that you miss actual red flags. You distrust the wrong things. Focus on shadows while real deception walks right past you. Because you're not reading the situation. You're reading your own playbook onto everyone else. And here's the trap. Once you've crossed into habitual deception, you can't easily cross back. Because to trust someone genuinely, you'd have to believe genuine trust is possible. But your entire framework says it isn't. Everyone's playing the same game you are. The only difference is some people hide it better. That belief isn't just wrong. It's isolating. It locks you in a world where connection is impossible because honesty is unimaginable. You did that to yourself. But you'll blame everyone else. Gaslighting. Your memory says one thing. They say another. You saw it happen. They tell you it didn't. You heard what they said. They claim they never said it. And the denials come so confidently, so consistently, that eventually you stop trusting your own recall. Maybe you did misremember. Maybe you did overact. Maybe you're the one who's wrong. Gaslighting. A form of manipulation designed to make you question your perception of reality. It's not just lying. It's systematically dismantling your ability to trust your own mind. The manipulator doesn't just change the facts. They change your relationship to truth itself. And by the time you realize what's happening, your sense of what's real has already been compromised. The term comes from a film. A husband dims the gaslights in their home, then denies the change when his wife notices. She sees the dimming. He insists she's imagining it. The goal isn't to win an argument. It's to make her doubt her sanity so completely that she becomes dependent on his version of reality. The tactic operates through persistent contradiction. The gaslighter denies things they've said or done, even when confronted with proof. I never said that. You're making things up. At first, you push back. You know what happened. But hearing the same denials over and over erodes confidence. Each denial plants a seed of doubt, and those seeds accumulate. Next comes the attack on your judgment. You're too sensitive. You always overact. You're being dramatic. The message is consistent. Your perceptions aren't just wrong. They're evidence of something broken in you. You start questioning not just your memory, but your right to feel the way you do. Eventually, you apologize for reactions that were entirely reasonable. The pattern escalates. They isolate you from outside perspectives. Tell you your friends are turning you against them. That your family doesn't understand the situation. Slowly, they become the only voice you hear. The sole authority on what's real. And once that happens, they don't need to manipulate actively anymore. You do it to yourself. You silence your doubts before they surface. Accept their version of events not because it makes sense, but because your mind has stopped trusting itself to disagree. What makes gaslighting so damaging isn't just the individual lies. It's the cumulative effect. Each denial, each contradiction, each dismissal of your reality chips away at your foundation. You lose the ability to anchor yourself. Your internal compass stops working. And without that anchor, you can't orient yourself. You become unmoored, floating in a version of reality someone else constructed for you. The cruelest part is how invisible it is while it's happening. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like confusion, like you're losing your grip. The gaslighter positions themselves as the stable one, the reasonable one. And you, struggling to make sense of contradictions they created, look like the problem. They've rewritten not just the facts, but the entire narrative. And you're left wondering if you ever knew what was real to begin with. Impression management. Every conversation is a performance. You adjust your tone based on who you're talking to. Soften certain opinions. Emphasize others. Choose words carefully. Decide what to reveal and what to keep hidden. You're not lying. You're curating, shaping how others see you by controlling what they know. This is impression management, the deliberate effort to influence how you're perceived. Everyone does it. In job interviews, you highlight strengths and downplay weaknesses. On dates, you present your best self. With family, you might hide parts of your life to avoid conflict. It's not deception in the traditional sense. It's strategic presentation. But the line between managing an impression and manufacturing one is thinner than most people admit. The process starts with self-monitoring. You track how others respond to you, notice what gets positive reactions and what doesn't. Then you adjust. Amplify behaviors that work. Suppress ones that don't. Over time, this becomes automatic. You're not consciously calculating every interaction. You've internalized the rules. You know which version of yourself to deploy in which context. Consider professional settings. You don't talk to your boss the same way you talk to your friends. Different vocabulary, different energy, different boundaries. That's normal. But it crosses into manipulation when the gap between your presented self and your actual self becomes a tool. When you're not just adapting to context, but actively constructing a false impression to gain advantage. Politicians are experts at this. Watch them shift depending on the audience. Speaking to donors, they emphasize fiscal responsibility. Speaking to voters, they emphasize social programs. Each audience gets the version that appeals to them. The politician isn't necessarily lying. They're selectively emphasizing, choosing which truths to highlight and which to leave unspoken. The impression they create is real in each context. But the overall picture is fragmented, deliberately incomplete. Relationships suffer from this constantly. You present confidence when you're anxious. Act interested when you're bored. Pretend to agree to avoid argument. Each instance seems harmless. But the accumulation creates distance. Your partner knows a version of you that's been edited, smoothed, optimized for their approval. The real you, the unmanaged you, stays hidden. And the longer that continues, the harder it becomes to let them see anything else. What makes impression management tricky is that it's both necessary and dangerous. Some amount of social calibration is required. You can't function without it. But when calibration becomes fabrication, when you're no longer adapting but performing, something fundamental shifts. You start losing track of which version is real. The managed impression becomes the default. And the person beneath it, the one you started with, gets buried under layers of strategic presentation. The trap closes when you can't turn it off. When even in private, you're still performing. Still monitoring. Still adjusting based on some imagined audience. At that point, impression management stops being a tool and becomes a cage. You've optimized yourself into someone you don't recognize. And the worst part is, you built the cage yourself. Strategic ambiguity. The email is perfectly vague. We're moving forward with changes. No specifics. No timeline. No clarity on what changes means. You read it 3 times trying to decode the message. Is this good news or bad? Are you included or excluded? The ambiguity isn't accidental. It's the point. Strategic ambiguity. The intentional use of unclear language to maintain flexibility. It's not confusion. It's control. By staying vague, the speaker keeps their options open. They can interpret their own statement however serves them later. And you, trying to pin down meaning, are left guessing. Politicians weaponize this constantly. We're exploring all options. Which options? What's the timeline? What's actually being considered? The statement sounds decisive but commits to nothing. If the situation changes, they can claim they never promised anything specific. The vagueness was the strategy. It let them sound active without binding themselves to action. Corporate communication runs on this. We're restructuring to better serve our customers. Translation unclear. Could mean layoffs. Could mean expansion. Could mean nothing. The ambiguity serves multiple purposes. It prevents panic. Avoids commitment. Leaves room to maneuver. Employees are left interpreting silence, trying to read meaning into phrases designed to carry none. Relationships use it too, though more subtly. I need some space. How much space? For how long? Is this temporary or permanent? The statement feels like communication, but it's actually evasion. By staying ambiguous, the speaker avoids the discomfort of being direct. They've signaled something without saying anything definitive. And you're left trying to decode intent from deliberate vagueness. The tactic works because we're wired to seek clarity. When presented with ambiguity, our brains try to resolve it. We fill in gaps, make assumptions, construct meaning where none was provided. Strategic ambiguity exploits that tendency. The speaker says something vague, you interpret it a certain way, and later they can claim that interpretation was yours, not theirs. Here's the mechanism. Ambiguous statements create multiple possible meanings. The speaker knows this. They choose vagueness precisely because it generates options. Then they wait. See how things develop. And when it's convenient, they select whichever interpretation suits them best. The original statement hasn't changed, but its meaning becomes whatever they need it to be. What makes this particularly effective is plausible deniability. They didn't lie. They were just unclear. You filled in the blanks yourself. If you misunderstood, that's your error, not their deception. They've protected themselves from accountability by never saying anything concrete enough to be held accountable for. The cost is trust. Every ambiguous statement erodes confidence. You stop taking communication at face value because you've learned there's no face value to take. Everything becomes suspect. Every word gets analyzed for hidden meaning. And eventually, you stop believing anything they say has real content. Because it doesn't. They've trained you to expect ambiguity. And once that expectation sets in, actual communication becomes impossible. Fabrication. It didn't happen the way you remember. It happened differently. And they'll tell you exactly how, in detail. With specifics. The story is so confident, so complete, that for a moment you question your own version. Except their version is fiction. Built from scratch, presented as fact. Fabrication. The complete invention of events, details, or narratives. It's not spinning the truth or leaving things out. It's creating something entirely false and inserting it into reality as if it's always been there. The fabricator doesn't just lie. They construct, build worlds. Populate them with details convincing enough to override what actually happened. Watch how it's done. Someone gets caught in a mistake at work. Instead of admitting it, they create an alternate timeline. They were following instructions from a meeting that never occurred. They have notes, they claim. They reference conversations that didn't happen. The fabrication is elaborate, detailed. internally consistent. And because most people assume others aren't constructing complete fictions, the lie often holds. The key is specificity. Vague lies are easy to doubt. But when someone provides dates, names, exact quotes, the mind treats it differently. Detail signals accuracy. We conflate thoroughness with truthfulness. The fabricator knows this. So they don't just lie. They build. Layer upon layer of false detail until the invention feels more real than reality. Children do this instinctively. Ask a child where the cookie went, and they'll spin an entire narrative. The dog ate it, or their sibling took it, or it fell and broke and they cleaned it up to be helpful. The story comes so fast it feels rehearsed, but it's not. It's improvised fabrication, building explanation in real time to avoid consequence. Adults refine the technique. A partner fabricates a work emergency to explain their absence. Not just, "I was at work late." They create a crisis, a client issue, urgent calls, specific problems they had to solve. The fabrication includes timestamps, names of colleagues, details about the problem. Each element reinforces the lie, makes it harder to question. Because who invents that level of detail if they're lying? The danger isn't just the initial fabrication, it's the maintenance. Every fabricated story needs support. You tell one lie, it requires 3 more to sustain it. Those 3 require 9. The structure grows, becomes complex, and the fabricator gets trapped maintaining a reality they invented. Eventually, they can't remember what's real and what they made up. The fabrication consumes them. What makes fabrication particularly corrosive is how it rewrites shared history. When someone fabricates events you were part of, they're not just lying to you. They're attempting to override your memory with their invention, telling you that what you experienced didn't happen, that their constructed version is what's real. And if they're convincing enough, if the fabrication is detailed enough, doubt creeps in. Maybe your memory is wrong. Maybe their version is what actually occurred. That's the goal. Not just to deceive, but to replace. To install a fabricated reality so convincingly that it becomes the accepted truth. And once that happens, once the fabrication is believed, the person who created it has done more than lie. They've altered reality itself. At least the version of it that everyone now accepts. Omission. You tell the truth. Every word is accurate. But you leave something out. One detail. One fact. One piece of context that would change everything. What you said wasn't false. But what you didn't say made all the difference. Omission. The act of withholding information while maintaining technical honesty. It's deception through silence. You're not lying. You're just not mentioning the parts that matter. And because people trust what they hear more than what they don't, the omission goes unnoticed until it's too late. The tactic is everywhere. A seller describes a house in glowing terms. Great neighborhood, recent renovations, perfect location. Everything they say is true. They just don't mention the foundation issues, the mold in the basement, the reason the previous owner left. Technically, they didn't lie. They simply chose which truths to share and which to keep quiet. Job candidates do this constantly. List accomplishments, highlight successes, emphasize strengths, but the gaps tell a different story. Why did they leave their last job? Why is there a 6-month break in employment? The resume isn't false. It's incomplete. Strategically, the omissions hide what the inclusions can't. Relationships run on this more than anyone admits. How was your day? Fine. True statement. But it omits the argument with a coworker, the text from an ex, the moment of doubt about the relationship. Each omission seems small, insignificant, but they accumulate. The picture your partner has of your life becomes a curated version, edited, with whole sections quietly removed. What makes omission effective is that it's hard to challenge. If someone lies outright, you can confront them. point to the falsehood, demand correction. But how do you confront something that wasn't said? How do you prove someone withheld information when they can simply claim they didn't think it was relevant? The omission leaves no trace. No evidence, just absence. Legal systems struggle with this. Witnesses swear to tell the truth. And they do. They just don't tell all of it. Answer the question asked but volunteer nothing more. The result is a technically accurate but fundamentally incomplete picture. And because they never lied, they can't be accused of perjury. The omission stays hidden behind a wall of literal truth. The psychology behind it is simple. Lying feels wrong. Omitting feels safer. You're not creating falsehood. You're just being selective. It's easier to justify. And because you're not saying anything untrue, you can maintain the self-image of an honest person. You told the truth. You just didn't tell all of it. That distinction matters to you. But to the person making decisions based on incomplete information, the effect is the same as a lie. Here's the trap. Once you start relying on omission, you can't stop. Each successful omission makes the next one easier. You learn which details to withhold, which context to skip, which facts would complicate the story you want to tell. And slowly, your communication becomes a minefield. Everything you say is true. But the truth you're telling isn't the truth that matters. And by the time someone realizes what you left out, the damage is done. Cover story. The explanation is ready before the question arrives. Smooth, confident, complete. They've thought through every angle, anticipated every challenge. The story holds because it was designed to hold, built specifically to hide what actually happened. This is a cover story, a pre-constructed narrative meant to explain away suspicious behavior or hide uncomfortable truth. It's not a spontaneous lie. It's engineered deception, planned, rehearsed, deployed when needed. And because it's been refined in advance, it sounds more convincing than the truth often does. Infidelity runs on cover stories. Someone having an affair doesn't just disappear for hours without explanation. They build infrastructure, create reasons to be unavailable. Work trips, late meetings, friend emergencies. Each excuse is plausible on its own, and because they've thought it through, the details align. Times match. Locations make sense. The story coheres because it was constructed to cohere. Employees use this to hide poor performance. Missed a deadline. The cover story is ready. The client changed requirements last minute. A key file got corrupted. Another team didn't deliver their piece on time. The explanation shifts blame outward, makes the failure seem unavoidable. And because it's delivered with confidence, with supporting details, it often gets accepted. What separates a cover story from a regular lie is preparation. Regular lies are reactive. You get caught, you scramble, you make something up. Cover stories are proactive. You plan the deception, build the explanation, and have it ready before anyone asks. The forethought makes them harder to break. There are no hesitations, no contradictions, no gaps. Because every potential weakness was identified and addressed before the story was ever told. The construction follows a pattern. Start with a kernel of truth, something verifiable. Then build the fiction around it. Yes, you were at that location, but for a different reason than the real one. Yes, you were with that person, but the context was innocent. The verifiable details provide cover for the invented ones. And because part of the story checks out, the rest gets accepted by association. Intelligence agencies operate this way. An operative needs a reason to be in a certain place at a certain time. So they create a cover story, a job, a reason to travel. Documentation to support it. The story isn't just words. It's backed by evidence. Fake business cards. Fabricated work history. References who'll confirm the narrative. The cover isn't just plausible. It's provable. Up to a point. The risk with cover stories is maintenance. You can't just tell the story once and walk away. You have to live it. Remember the details. Keep the timeline straight. Coordinate with anyone else who's part of the deception. Each retelling has to match the previous one. And the longer the cover story runs, the more complex it becomes. Eventually, the cognitive load of maintaining the fiction outweighs the benefit of the deception. But by then, the cover story has served its purpose. It bought time, deflected suspicion, allowed the real activity to continue undetected. And even when the cover finally breaks, when the contradictions pile up and the story falls apart, the damage is done. The deception succeeded long enough to achieve its goal. The cover story wasn't meant to last forever, just long enough. Paltering. Everything they said was true. Sales were up last quarter. Customer satisfaction improved. The product launched on schedule. All facts. All verifiable. But they left out the part where profits dropped. Where half the team quit. Where the product had to be recalled within weeks. The truth wasn't a lie. It was just incomplete enough to create the wrong impression. Paltering. The use of truthful statements to deceive. It's not lying in the traditional sense. Every word is accurate, but the selection is strategic. You choose truths that mislead while maintaining plausible deniability. You told the truth, just not the whole truth. And the part you left out was the part that mattered. Politicians live here. Asked about a policy failure, they pivot to a related success. You're asking about healthcare costs, but let me tell you about enrollment numbers. The enrollment data is real. The increase is genuine. But it sidesteps the actual question. The answer creates the impression of success while avoiding the failure entirely. Nothing false was said. But the truth conveyed wasn't the truth requested. Watch how it works in negotiations. A seller is asked if there are problems with the property. They respond, "We've maintained it regularly. Had the roof redone recently. New HVAC last year." All true. But they didn't mention the foundation cracks or the electrical issues. They answered with truths that implied good condition without directly claiming it. If problems surface later, they can point to what they said. Never lied. Just emphasized certain facts over others. Relationships use this constantly. Did you enjoy the dinner with my parents? Your mom's cooking was great. Really impressive. True statement. But it deflects from the actual question. The food was fine. The evening wasn't. By responding with a truth about one aspect, you avoid lying while still dodging the real question. The person asking feels answered. But they weren't. What makes paltering effective is how it exploits conversational norms. When someone asks a question, we assume the answer addresses what they actually wanted to know. Paltering violates that assumption while staying within the literal bounds of honesty. The speaker provides truth, just not relevant truth. And because we're conditioned to trust truthful statements, we often don't notice the misdirection until later. The danger is in what gets internalized. The palterer maintains their self-image as honest. They didn't lie. They told the truth. That's not just a defense against accusation. It's a defense against guilt. They can engage in systematic deception while genuinely believing they're being honest. Because technically they are. The deception happens in the selection, not the statements themselves. Here's why it persists. Paltering is harder to call out than lying. If someone lies, you can confront them with the falsehood. But if someone palters, what do you challenge? The truth they told. The truth they didn't. They'll claim they answered your question. If you wanted different information, you should have asked a different question. The accountability shifts back to you. And the deception continues, protected by a shield of selective truth. Half-truth. The story sounds right, feels complete. But it's been edited. Key details removed. Context stripped away. What you're hearing is accurate as far as it goes. It just doesn't go far enough. And the gap between what's said and what's real is where the deception lies. Half-truths. Statements that are factually correct but fundamentally misleading because they omit critical context. It's truth at 50%. Enough to pass as honest. Not enough to represent reality. The speaker isn't lying. They're just telling half the story, and letting you assume the other half matches when it doesn't. Advertising runs on this. 9 out of 10 dentists recommend our toothpaste. True statement. But what you don't hear is that they also recommended 6 other brands, or that the survey phrased the question in a way that made disagreement nearly impossible. The claim is accurate. The impression it creates is not. That gap is intentional. Job references operate here too. A manager is asked about a former employee's performance. They were always on time, very organized, good with administrative tasks, all true. But they don't mention the interpersonal conflicts, the inability to work under pressure, the reason the person was let go. The reference is positive on its surface, but it's engineered to satisfy the inquiry without actually endorsing the candidate. The truth told conceals the truth withheld. Parents use this with children instinctively. Where did the cookie go? It was on the counter earlier. True. But it sidesteps who took it. The child isn't lying. They're providing a fact that implies innocence without claiming it. The half-truth creates distance from wrongdoing while maintaining technical honesty. What makes half-truths particularly slippery is their resistance to correction. You can't dispute what's factually accurate. And the person telling the half-truth knows this. They've selected information that's defensible. If challenged, they point to what they said. All true. If you feel missiled, that's your interpretation. They just stated facts. The psychological appeal is clear. Half-truths let you deceive without lying. You can mislead while maintaining your self-concept as honest. Because you are being honest, partially. And that partial honesty protects you from both external accusation and internal guilt. You didn't lie. You just didn't tell everything. That distinction feels meaningful. Even though the effect is the same, relationships corrode under this. Your partner asks if you're upset. I'm fine. And you are fine about most things. Just not the thing they're actually asking about. The half-truth lets you avoid the conversation while technically not lying. But the unaddressed issue doesn't disappear. It compounds. Each half-truth adds to a growing gap between what's said and what's real. Eventually, the gap becomes the relationship. Two people communicating in partial truths, neither knowing the full story, both convinced they're being honest. Feigning ignorance. They know. You know they know, but they look at you with blank confusion. I have no idea what you're talking about. The performance is convincing, just uncertain enough to seem genuine. And unless you can prove they knew, the pretense holds. They've created doubt where none should exist. Feigning ignorance. Pretending not to know something you clearly know. It's not about lack of information. It's about strategic denial of awareness. You claim ignorance to avoid responsibility, escape accountability, or maintain plausible deniability. And because knowledge is internal, invisible, you can deny it convincingly as long as there's no proof you possessed it. Watch it in organizations. A directive down that's unpopular or likely to cause problems. The person who issued it suddenly doesn't remember doing so. I don't recall approving that. Maybe they didn't. Or maybe they're pretending they didn't to avoid the consequences. There's no way to prove what they remember. Memory is internal. Deniable. And they're using that deniability as cover. Witnesses do this in investigations. Asked what they saw, they claim they don't remember. Saw nothing. Heard nothing. Knew nothing. But they were there. They saw it happen. The feigned ignorance protects them from involvement. If they admit knowledge, they might be called to testify. forced to take sides. Better to claim ignorance and stay clear. Children master this early. Confront them about something they clearly did, and they stare at you with wide-eyed innocence. What? I didn't know I wasn't supposed to. Sometimes they genuinely didn't know. Other times, they're performing ignorance to escape punishment. And if you can't prove they knew, you can't fully hold them accountable. The tactic works because knowledge is hard to prove. You can prove someone was in a room. You can prove they received a message. But you can't prove what they understood or retained. That internal state is invisible. So when someone says, "I didn't know," you're stuck. You can suspect. You can infer. But you can't definitively disprove their claim. What makes feigned ignorance particularly effective is how it shifts burden. If someone denies knowledge, you now have to prove they possessed it. That's a high bar. Even when it's obvious they knew, proving it requires evidence of their internal state. And unless they admitted knowledge previously, that evidence often doesn't exist. They've created a shield out of the unknowability of their own mind. The cost is trust. Once someone has feigned ignorance, every future claim of not knowing becomes suspect. Did they really not know? Or are they pretending again? The relationship becomes a guessing game. You can't take their word at face value because you've learned it might be performance. And they know you doubt them. But they can't drop the tactic because it's too useful. So the cycle continues. Each feigned ignorance eroding the foundation a little more. Emotional dissemblance. The smile is perfect. Warm, genuine looking. But underneath it, there's nothing, or worse, something opposite. Anger, contempt, indifference. You're seeing the performance, not the feeling. And if the performance is good enough, you never know the difference. Emotional dissemblance. The deliberate misrepresentation of emotional state. Showing one feeling while experiencing another. It's not just hiding emotion. It's actively displaying the wrong one. You're not concealing your anger. You're performing happiness. And the target believes the performance because emotions are supposed to be involuntary. Authentic. When someone smiles, we assume they're happy. That assumption is what makes dissemblance work. Service jobs require this constantly. Retail workers deal with difficult customers while maintaining pleasant demeanors. The customer is rude, dismissive, unreasonable. The worker feels frustrated, disrespected, exhausted, but they smile, nod, speak in warm tones. The displayed emotion has nothing to do with what they actually feel. It's required performance, and most customers accept it as genuine because they're not looking for the gap. Negotiations run on this. Someone receives an offer that's insulting, too low, poorly structured, offensive even. But they don't show it. They maintain neutral interest, maybe even mild enthusiasm. Interesting. Let me think about it. The real response, anger or dismissal, stays hidden. The false one, measured consideration, takes its place. The dissemblance keeps options open, maintains leverage, prevents the other side from knowing they've missed the mark. Relationships use this more than anyone admits. Your partner does something that bothers you, but instead of showing irritation, you perform understanding. It's fine. Don't worry about it. The words say one thing. Your actual feeling is different, but expressing the real emotion feels risky. Might start a fight. Create distance. Better to dissemble. Show the emotion that maintains peace, even if it's false. What makes emotional dissemblance complex is that it's often both strategic and automatic. Sometimes you consciously choose to display the wrong emotion, a calculated decision to mislead. Other times, the dissemblance is so practiced it's reflexive. You've performed the emotion so many times it deploys without thought. Either way, the gap between felt and displayed emotion becomes a tool, one you might not even notice you're using. The mechanism leverages a fundamental assumption. We treat emotional displays as honest signals. Evolution trained us to read faces, voices, body language. Those readings work when the signals are authentic. But when someone can control their display, when they've learned to dissemble convincingly, the system breaks. You're reading signals that have been deliberately falsified. And because you trust emotional expression, you believe the lie. Here's the trap. Chronic dissemblance doesn't just deceive others. It confuses you. When you routinely display emotions you don't feel, the boundary between performance and experience blurs. You start losing track of what you actually feel versus what you're showing. The dissemblance becomes your emotional reality. Not because you're afflicted, because you've practiced the false emotion so thoroughly it's replaced the real one. And at that point, you're not deceiving others anymore. You're deceiving yourself. False confession. Innocent people confess to crimes they didn't commit. Not under torture. Not in some distant dystopia. Here, now. In interrogation rooms. Under pressure. Tired. Confused. Wanting it to end. And the easiest way to make it stop is to say what they want to hear. Even if it's not true. Even if it means admitting to something you never did. False confession. Admitting to actions or knowledge you don't possess. It's not about guilt. It's about escape. Compliance. The psychological weight of interrogation, of accusation, of sustained pressure becomes unbearable. And confessing, even falsely, offers relief. The interrogation ends. The pressure stops. The immediate pain goes away. The long-term consequences feel distant, abstract. The confession is the exit, even when it's a lie. The mechanism is simpler than you'd think. Interrogators are trained to create pressure. Long sessions. Repeated accusations. Minimal breaks. They suggest they have evidence they might not have. Imply that cooperation will result in leniency. Exhaust you. And when you're exhausted, when your resistance is depleted, when you just want it to stop, confession becomes the path of least resistance. Even if you're innocent, because the pain of continuing to deny outweighs the abstract risk of admitting. Children do this instinctively. Accused by a parent or teacher, facing sustained questioning, they confess to end it. Yes, I did it. I'm sorry. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they didn't. But the confession stops the interrogation, restores calm, and for a child, immediate relief trumps future consequence every time. Adults aren't immune. The dynamics shift, but the psychology remains. Workplace investigations, relationship confrontations, social accusations. When someone is convinced you're guilty and won't accept denial, when the pressure to admit intensifies, when resistance becomes more painful than compliance, false confession becomes viable. Not because you're weak, because the human mind has limits, and sustained accusation finds them. What makes false confessions particularly insidious is how they're treated afterward. Once someone confesses, even falsely, that confession becomes evidence. It's treated as definitive. Because why would someone admit to something they didn't do? The assumption of rationality works against the confessor. Courts, employers, partners all give confessions heavy weight, even when obtained under pressure, even when later retracted. The confession, once given, is almost impossible to undo. The psychological aftermath is brutal. You confess to something you didn't do. Now you have to live with that. People believe you're guilty. Your denial is dismissed as backtracking. And part of you might start wondering if maybe you did do it. If maybe your memory is wrong. The false confession doesn't just create legal or social consequences. It destabilizes your own sense of reality. You said you did it. Everyone else believes you did it. Maybe they're right and you're wrong. The broader lesson is about pressure and compliance. Human beings will say almost anything to escape sustained psychological pressure. Truth becomes secondary to relief. And once you understand that, once you see how easily false confessions happen, you realize that confession itself isn't proof of anything. It's just evidence that someone reached their breaking point. Whether that breaking point arrived at truth or falsehood is a separate question entirely. Misdirection. They're not hiding the thing. They're making you look somewhere else. Your attention is focused on the wrong target. By the time you realize, the real action has already happened. And you never saw it because you were looking exactly where they wanted you to look. Misdirection. The deliberate redirection of attention away from what matters. It's not concealment. It's manipulation of focus. You draw attention to something visible, obvious, engaging, while the real movement happens in the periphery. The target sees what you show them, misses what you're actually doing, and by the time they realize they were watching the wrong thing, it's too late. Magicians built entire art forms around this. The flourish with the right hand while the left hand does the work. The dramatic gesture that captures attention while the actual trick happens elsewhere. You're watching the cards. You should be watching their pocket. You're focused on the wand. You should be watching the table. The misdirection isn't about hiding. It's about controlling what you notice. Politicians use this constantly. A scandal emerges. Instead of addressing it, they create a different controversy. Something louder, more inflammatory, more immediate. The news cycle shifts. Public attention follows. And while everyone's focused on the new issue, the original problem gets buried. Not hidden, just forgotten because something shinier appeared. Workplace misdirection looks different but functions the same. A manager deflects questions about a failed project by highlighting an unrelated success. Let's talk about the Q4 numbers instead. The success is real. But it's not what was asked about. The attention shift is strategic. By the time you circle back to the original question, the moment has passed. The failure isn't addressed. Just sidestep through attention control. Relationships use this in subtler ways. An argument starts about one issue. Midway through, the other person brings up something you did months ago. Different topic, different context, but effective. Your attention shifts to defending yourself on the new front. The original issue gets dropped, not resolved, just replaced. The misdirection diffused the conflict by redirecting its focus. What makes misdirection powerful is that it's invisible while it's working. You don't notice your attention being controlled because the thing you're watching feels important, relevant, worth focusing on. The person directing you knows this. They've made the distraction compelling enough that shifting focus feels natural, not manipulated. And by the time you realize where you should have been looking, the moment to act has passed. The key is in timing. Misdirection doesn't work if the redirect is too obvious or too late. It has to happen at the precise moment when attention is malleable. When the target is receptive to shifting focus. Right after a question is asked but before it's fully processed. Right when an issue is raised but before it's explored. The window is small, but in that window attention can be steered. And once steered, it's hard to bring back to the original target. Here's the real danger. Effective misdirection doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like natural conversation flow, like reasonable topic progression. You don't fight it because you don't recognize it as an attack. You just follow where the conversation leads. And the person guiding it knows exactly where it's going. Away from the truth that matters. Toward the distraction that doesn't. By the time you look back, you've forgotten what you were even asking about. Self-presentation. You're not the same person in every room. At work, you're professional, measured, careful with words. With friends, you're looser, more opinionated, less filtered. With family, different again. None of these versions is fake, but none is complete either. You're adjusting, selecting which parts of yourself to show based on who's watching. Self-presentation. The ongoing process of managing how others perceive you. It's not deception in the obvious sense. You're not lying about who you are. You're curating it, emphasizing certain traits, downplaying others, choosing which version of yourself fits the context. And in that choosing, you're shaping reality. Not the reality of who you are, the reality of who others think you are. The process is so automatic most people don't notice they're doing it. You walk into a job interview. Without thinking, you sit straighter, speak more formally, highlight achievements, minimize weaknesses. You didn't rehearse this. It just happens. Your brain reads the context and deploys the appropriate version of you, the one most likely to succeed in this specific situation. Social media makes this visible. Every post is a choice. Every photo is selected. You're not showing your life. You're showing the parts of your life you want seen. The vacation, not the argument that happened on it. The success, not the failures that led to it. The presentation is real. The experiences happen. But the curation creates a gap between what's shown and what's lived. The danger isn't in the adjustment itself. Some degree of context-appropriate behavior is necessary. You can't function in society without it. The danger is when the gap between presentation and reality becomes a tool. When you're not adapting to context, but actively constructing a false impression to manipulate perception. When the version you present is designed not to reflect truth, but to achieve a goal. Consider someone interviewing for a leadership position. They present confidence, decisiveness, experience handling pressure. All real qualities, perhaps, but exaggerated. The confidence is performance. The decisiveness is selective memory. The pressure experience is one situation presented as though it's consistent capability. The presentation isn't lying. It's strategic truth. Showing what helps. Hiding what doesn't. What makes self-presentation complex is the internal feedback loop. When you present a certain version of yourself repeatedly, it starts to feel true. The performance becomes the identity. You're not pretending to be confident anymore. You've internalized the presentation. It's who you are now. Except it's not. It's who you've convinced yourself you are by performing it consistently enough that the distinction blurred. Relationships suffer most from this. Your partner knows a curated version. The parts you're comfortable showing, the aspects you've deemed acceptable. But the unshown parts don't disappear. They're still there, still affecting you, still influencing your behavior, but hidden. And the longer you maintain the presentation, the harder it becomes to let the full version emerge. Because you've invested so much in the curated one. Dropping it feels like admitting you've been dishonest. Even though you haven't. You've just been incomplete. Self-promotion. Listen to them talk. Every story features them at the center. Every success is theirs. Every achievement gets highlighted, repeated, emphasized. They're not just sharing information. They're building a case. Making sure you know how capable they are, how valuable, how much more they've accomplished than anyone realizes. Self-promotion. The active effort to highlight one's own achievements, abilities, or qualities to others. It's self-presentation with an agenda. You're not just managing how you're seen. You're actively arguing for a specific perception, one that positions you as more competent, more successful, more worthy of attention than you might otherwise appear. The workplace runs on this. Performance reviews, meetings, casual conversations. Every interaction is an opportunity to remind others what you've done, who you know, what you're capable of. The employee who stays quiet gets overlooked. The one who self-promotes gets noticed, gets promoted. The system rewards the presentation of value as much as the value itself. But there's a line. Appropriate self-promotion sounds like confidence. Excessive self-promotion sounds like insecurity. The person who can't stop talking about their accomplishments signals doubt. They're trying too hard, overcompensating for a gap between how they see themselves and how they fear others see them. The volume of self-promotion inverts its purpose. Instead of convincing you they're accomplished, it convinces you they're desperate for validation. Social proof operates here. Someone tells you about their success once, you might believe them. They tell you 5 times, you start questioning. Why do they need you to know this so badly? What are they trying to prove? The repetition undermines credibility. Not because the accomplishments are false, because the need to emphasize them reveals uncertainty about whether they'll be recognized without prompting. The mechanism creates a trap. You self-promote because you want recognition, but effective self-promotion requires subtlety. Too overt, and it backfires. You come across as arrogant, self-absorbed. People start discounting your claims even when they're accurate, because the presentation has overwhelmed the substance. You're no longer sharing achievements. You're performing them. And the performance is what people remember, not the accomplishment. Chronic self-promoters lose track of the boundary. They can't tell the difference between sharing relevant information and broadcasting their resume. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to insert their credentials. Someone mentions a problem at work. The self-promoter responds with how they solved a similar issue. A friend talks about a trip. The self-promoter pivots to their more impressive travel history. The pattern is relentless and exhausting. What drives it isn't malice, it's fear. Fear that if they don't advocate for themselves, no one will. Fear that their value isn't obvious. Fear that without constant reminders they'll be forgotten. That fear might be justified. In competitive environments, visibility matters. But the response, constant self-promotion, often generates the opposite of what it's designed to achieve. Instead of being seen as valuable, you're seen as insufferable. And the value you actually possess gets buried under the noise of trying to prove it. Ingratiation. They agree with everything you say. Laugh at jokes that aren't funny. Compliment choices that don't deserve it. You're not fooled. Not exactly. But it works anyway. Because flattery, even transparent flattery, feels good. And the person delivering it knows that. They're not trying to be subtle. They're betting that your desire to be liked outweighs your awareness of being manipulated. Ingratiation. The deliberate use of flattery, agreement, and favor doing to make yourself likable to someone. It's strategic charm. You're not being nice because you want to be. You're being nice because you want something. Approval. Access. Advantage. The warmth is real in execution but calculated in purpose. Watch how it operates in hierarchies. A junior employee finds ways to agree with their manager. Not on everything. That would be obvious, but on key points. The manager makes a suggestion. The employee validates it, adds supporting points, makes the manager feel heard, smart, valued. The ingratiation doesn't feel manipulative because it's delivered as genuine engagement. But the pattern is clear. Agreement flows upward. Disagreement stays hidden. Salespeople live here. They mirror your energy. Match your pace of speech. Find common ground quickly. I love that band too. I grew up near there. My brother went to that school. Some of it might be true, but even when it's not, it works. Because similarity breeds liking, and liking breeds trust, and trust leads to sales. The ingratiation isn't about building a real connection. It's about building one that lasts long enough to close the deal. Relationships use ingratiation in subtler forms. Early dating is full of it. You emphasize shared interests. Downplay differences. Agree more than you normally would. Not because you're being dishonest, because you're trying to be liked. And being agreeable makes you likable. The ingratiation is soft, natural, but it's still strategic. You're managing the impression to increase attraction. The tactic works because it exploits a basic human need. People want to be liked, appreciated, validated. Ingratiation provides that. And even when you know it's strategic, even when you recognize the flattery as performance, it still affects you, because the emotional response to being praised isn't fully under conscious control. Your brain reacts to the validation even when your mind knows it's manufactured. Here's the complexity. Some ingratiation is socially necessary. You can't go through life contradicting everyone and refusing to acknowledge what they value. Basic politeness requires some level of strategic agreeableness. The line between appropriate social calibration and manipulative ingratiation is blurry. Intent matters. But intent is internal, invisible. From the outside, genuine warmth and strategic charm look identical. The cost shows up over time. If you ingratiate habitually, people stop trusting your positive responses. Your compliments lose weight. Your agreements feel hollow, because they've learned that your validation isn't tied to genuine appreciation. It's tied to what you want. And once that connection is made, your currency devalues. The ingratiation that used to work stops working. Not because people caught you lying, because they caught you performing. And performance, no matter how skilled, isn't the same as authenticity. Facework. The mistake was public, visible, undeniable, and now the damage control begins. Not admitting fault, not apologizing properly, controlling the narrative, preserving the image, making sure that even if everyone knows you messed up, they don't see you as someone who messes up. The content of what happened matters less than the perception of who you are. Facework. The strategies people use to maintain or repair their public image when it's threatened. It's not about truth. It's about dignity. About making sure that whatever happened, your status, your reputation, your standing remains intact, or at least recoverable. The focus isn't on fixing the problem. It's on managing how the problem makes you look. Watch someone caught in an error during a meeting. They don't just admit it and move on. They contextualize. The data I had was incomplete. I was working from an earlier version. There was miscommunication from another team. Each statement might be true, but the function isn't explanation. It's face-saving. They're reframing the mistake so it doesn't attach to their competence. The error happened, but it wasn't their fault. Or if it was, there were extenuating circumstances. The image stays protected. Cultural contexts shape how facework operates. In some settings, direct confrontation threatens face, so disagreement gets wrapped in layers of politeness. Indirect phrasing, saving the other person's dignity while still making your point. In other contexts, directness is valued. But even there, facework appears, just in different forms. The aggressive defense, the refusal to back down, the doubling down when wrong. All strategies to preserve the image of strength, even at the cost of being correct. Apologies are facework battlegrounds. A genuine apology acknowledges harm, takes responsibility, but facework-driven apologies do something else. They minimize. I'm sorry if anyone was offended. Not sorry for the action. Sorry for how it was received. The facework preserves the image. I'm not someone who does harmful things. I'm someone whose reasonable actions were misinterpreted by overly sensitive people. The apology form is there. The face-saving function is clear. Social media amplifies this. A controversial post gets backlash. The facework response isn't to engage with the criticism. It's to reframe. People are taking this out of context. This was clearly a joke. I'm being attacked for speaking truth. The strategy protects the image. They're not wrong. They're misunderstood, or they're right in being silenced. Either way, the face is preserved. The actual issue gets buried under the defense. What makes facework tricky is that it's partly necessary. Complete honesty about every failure would be socially unbearable. Some degree of image management is required to function. but when facework becomes the primary response to mistakes. When preserving image takes precedence over addressing harm, it corrodes trust. Because people learn that you value your reputation more than truth. That admitting fault is impossible for you. That every interaction will be filtered through your need to look good. The trap is self-reinforcing. The more invested you are in your image, the more threatening any challenge to it becomes. Small mistakes feel like existential threats. Because if you're wrong about this, maybe you're wrong about other things. Maybe the image you've built isn't accurate. So you defend harder. Deploy more facework. And each defensive move makes the next one more necessary. Because you're not just protecting your image anymore. You're protecting the entire structure of defenses you've built around it. Passive deception. They didn't lie. They just didn't correct you when you got it wrong. You assumed something. They heard the assumption, knew it was false, and said nothing. Let you believe the error. Because correcting it would have been inconvenient, or costly, or uncomfortable. The deception happened in the silence, in what wasn't said when it should have been. Passive deception. Allowing someone to maintain a false belief without actively lying to create it. You're not building the misconception. You're just not dismantling it. The target draws the wrong conclusion. You recognize the error. And you let it stand. Because it serves you. The lie of omission taken one step further. Not just withholding information. Withholding correction. Job interviews run on this. You're asked about a skill. You give an answer that's technically accurate but leaves an inflated impression. The interviewer assumes a level of expertise you don't actually have. You hear the assumption in their follow-up questions. You could clarify, set the record straight. But you don't, because the misconception is working in your favor. You didn't lie. You just didn't volunteer the truth that would undermine the false belief you've benefited from. Relationships use this constantly. Your partner assumes you're okay with something. You're not. But you don't say so. Not because you can't. Because it's easier to let them believe the false positive than to have the difficult conversation. The deception is passive. You didn't tell them you were fine. You just didn't tell them you weren't. And their assumption fills the gap. Later, when it becomes an issue, you can claim you never said you were okay with it. Technically true. But misleading. The tactic exploits a basic social contract. We assume people will correct significant misunderstandings. When someone operates under a false belief that affects decision-making, we expect them to be informed. Passive deception violates that expectation. Not through action. Through inaction. The person knows better. They just choose not to share what they know. And the target, unaware of the deception, continues making choices based on incomplete or incorrect information. What makes passive deception appealing is deniability. If confronted, you can truthfully say you never lied. You didn't create the false belief. You didn't actively mislead. The other person made an assumption. You simply didn't correct it. That defense works legally. Ethically, it's weaker, because you had information that would have changed their understanding, and you chose to withhold it. Not because you forgot. Because revealing it would have cost you something. The psychology is straightforward. Active lying feels wrong. It violates self-concept. But passive deception feels safer. You're not doing anything. You're just not doing something. That distinction matters psychologically. It lets you engage in deception while maintaining the identity of an honest person. You didn't lie. You just didn't help them see the truth. And that omission feels less culpable, even though the effect is identical. Here's the cost. Once someone realizes you've engaged in passive deception, they stop trusting your silence. Every time you don't correct them, they wonder if you're letting them stay wrong. Every assumption they make, they second guess. because they've learned that your silence doesn't mean agreement or confirmation. It might just mean you're benefiting from their error. And in that uncertainty, communication breaks down. Because they can't rely on you to tell them when they're wrong, only when it's convenient for you. Active deception. The lie is deliberate, constructed, delivered with intent. You're not letting someone believe something false. You're making them believe it, building the misconception from scratch, feeding it with false details, reinforcing it when questioned. This isn't passive. It's engineered. Every word chosen to create a specific false impression. Every gesture calibrated to sell the deception. Active deception. The intentional creation of false beliefs through direct communication. It's lying, but the scope is broader. Fabricating stories. Manufacturing evidence. Coordinating with others to maintain the illusion. The deception isn't incidental. It's the goal. And everything else, the words, the behavior, the supporting details, is in service of that goal. Infidelity operates here most visibly. The cheating isn't passive. The deception around it is active, constructed alibis, fake work trips, coordinated stories with accomplices. The partner asks where you were. You don't just avoid answering. You provide a detailed false narrative, complete with specifics designed to make it believable. The gas station you stopped at, the colleague you met with, the traffic that delayed you. None of it true. All of it designed to create belief in something that didn't happen. Fraud relies entirely on active deception. The con artist doesn't wait for you to make assumptions. They build a world. Create documentation. Establish fake credentials. Construct an entire false reality and sell it to you piece by piece. Each interaction adds another layer, another detail that makes the lie more convincing. The deception is total and active at every stage. What separates active deception from other forms is the energy required. Passive deception is low effort. You just don't correct. Active deception demands constant attention. You have to remember what you said. Keep the story straight. Anticipate questions. Prepare responses. Coordinate with anyone else involved. The cognitive load is substantial, and the longer the deception runs, the more complex it becomes. Each lie requires supporting lies. Each detail creates potential for contradiction. The mechanism depends on confidence. Active deception only works if delivered convincingly. Hesitation signals doubt, and doubt triggers suspicion. So the deceiver commits fully, tells the lie with the same confidence they'd use for truth, maintains eye contact, keeps voice steady, provides detail without prompting. The performance is calculated, but it has to look effortless, because any visible effort reveals the construction, and revealing the construction exposes the lie. Here's why it escalates. Once you've actively deceived, maintaining the deception becomes necessary. You can't just stop. The false belief is out there, acting on it, generating consequences. If you admit the deception now, you face not just the original issue, but the added weight of having lied about it. So you continue. Add more deception to cover the first. The structure grows, becomes harder to maintain, but also harder to abandon. Because dismantling it means admitting everything, and the cost of that admission grows with each additional layer. The damage isn't just to the person deceived, it's to the deceiver. Active deception requires you to live in two realities, the true one and the false one you've created. You have to track both, remember which version you've told to whom. Maintain consistency in the false reality while navigating the true one. That split is cognitively exhausting and psychologically corrosive, because eventually you start losing track of which reality is which. The lie you've been living becomes the story you believe, and the truth becomes the thing that feels false. So desirability. Why do people lie on surveys? Not because they're dishonest, because they're answering the question they think they should answer. Not what they actually do or believe, but what makes them look good, reasonable, moral, normal. The response isn't about truth, it's about appearing acceptable. And that gap between reality and presentation shows up everywhere someone's being evaluated. Social desirability bias. The tendency to answer questions in ways that make you look better rather than ways that reflect reality. You're not consciously lying. You're unconsciously editing, filtering your response through an image of who you want to be seen as. And that filtered version becomes your answer, even when it's not accurate. Watch it operate in self-reporting. Someone's asked how often they exercise. They think about their intentions, their ideal self, the version of them that goes to the gym regularly, and they report that. Not the actual frequency, the aspirational one. The number that makes them sound disciplined, health-conscious, the kind of person who prioritizes fitness. The real answer might be once a week. The reported answer is 3 or 4 times. The gap isn't deliberate dishonesty. It's social desirability shaping the response. Job applications live here. Do you work well under pressure? Everyone says yes. Not because everyone thrives under pressure, because saying no makes you sound weak, unreliable, not a team player. The socially desirable answer is yes. So that's what gets written. Even when the truth is different. Even when pressure makes you anxious or less effective. The bias overrides accuracy in favor of presentation. Medical contexts suffer from this constantly. Doctors ask about smoking, drinking, exercise, diet. Patients underreport the unhealthy behaviors, overreport the healthy ones. Not because they're trying to deceive their doctor, because admitting the full truth feels shameful. Like confessing failure. So the response gets adjusted, made more acceptable, and the doctor gets incomplete information, which affects treatment. But the patient's need to appear responsible outweighs the need for accurate disclosure. What makes social desirability particularly persistent is that it operates below conscious awareness. You're not thinking, I'm going to lie here to look good. You're thinking about the question. And your answer forms based on what feels right to say, what sounds reasonable, what aligns with how you want to be perceived. The bias is in the formation, not the delivery. By the time you speak, you genuinely believe the filtered version is accurate. The mechanism creates systematic distortion. In research, it skews data. In hiring, it produces inflated self-assessments. In relationships, it prevents honest communication about needs and boundaries. Because the bias isn't about individual questions. It's a constant filter. Every interaction where there's potential judgment, the filter activates. And the version of you that emerges is the one designed to be acceptable. Not necessarily the one that's true. The trap is self-reinforcement. The more you answer in socially desirable ways, the more those answers become your self-concept. You're not just presenting yourself as disciplined or healthy or hardworking. You're starting to believe you are those things. The presentation replaces the reality in your own mind. And at that point, the bias isn't just affecting how others see you. It's affecting how you see yourself. Reputation management. The scandal breaks. Within hours, the response is live. Not an apology, a statement, carefully worded, legal approved, designed to minimize damage. The focus isn't on what happened. It's on controlling how what happened is perceived. The truth is secondary. The narrative is everything, and reputation management is the process of making sure the narrative protects the image, whatever the cost. Reputation management. The strategic control of how you're perceived publicly, especially when that perception is threatened. It's not about being good. It's about being seen as good. Or at least not being seen as bad. The tactics vary. Denials, clarifications, deflections, counter-narratives. But the goal is constant. Protect the reputation. Preserve the brand. Keep the damage contained. Public figures live in this space full-time. A politician says something controversial. The reputation management kicks in immediately. If it was a joke, it gets framed as satire taken out of context. If it was serious, it gets recontextualized as fighting for an important cause. If it's indefensible, the response pivots to attacking critics. The content doesn't matter as much as the narrative around it, and that narrative is engineered. Corporations do this institutionally. A product fails. People get hurt. The company doesn't lead with accountability. They lead with reputation management. Express concern. Announce an investigation. Emphasize their commitment to safety. Each statement is designed to signal responsibility without admitting liability, because admission opens legal exposure. So the message gets calibrated. Sympathetic enough to seem caring. Vague enough to avoid consequences. Individuals use reputation management in smaller but similar ways. You're caught doing something that contradicts your image. The response isn't honest admission. It's damage control. Explanations that preserve the image. That's not who I am. I was going through a difficult time. People don't understand the full context. Each phrase is reputation management. Protecting the self-concept you've built publicly. Making sure the incident doesn't define you. What makes reputation management effective is speed and control. The first narrative often sticks, so the response has to be fast. Shape the story before others shape it for you. And the story has to be simple, clear, memorable. Complex truths don't protect reputations. Simple, defensible narratives do. So the truth gets simplified, edited, reframed into something that preserves the image while technically addressing the issue. The cost is trust. Once people recognize reputation management in action, they stop believing your statements. Every response gets viewed as strategic rather than honest. You're not communicating. You're managing. And that management creates distance. Because people can tell when they're being handled. When the priority isn't truth but presentation. And once they see it, they can't unsee it. Every future statement gets filtered through that awareness. Is this real? Or is this reputation management? The deeper trap is internal. When you engage in reputation management habitually, you stop distinguishing between protecting your reputation and protecting yourself. Criticism of your actions feels like an attack on your identity. Because you've merged the two. The reputation isn't separate from you. It is you. And defending it becomes automatic, reflexive, even when it means distorting truth, because protecting the reputation has become indistinguishable from self-preservation. Information control. They don't answer the question you asked. They answer a different one. Something adjacent, related, but not what you wanted to know. And they do it smoothly, confidently, as if they've addressed your concern, but they haven't. They've redirected, taken control of what information gets shared, and in that control they've shaped what you know, what you can act on, what conclusions you can draw. Information control, the strategic management of what information is released, when to whom, and in what form. It's not just withholding. It's active curation. You decide what others know. Time the revelations. Frame the disclosures. And in doing so, you control not just the information but the reality constructed from it. Governments master this. Classified information. Redacted documents. Controlled leaks. Everything released goes through filters. What serves the narrative gets disclosed. What complicates it stays hidden. The control isn't always about hiding wrongdoing. Sometimes it's about managing perception, preventing panic, maintaining authority. But the effect is the same. Information flows through gates, and the gatekeeper decides what passes. Corporate environments operate similarly. Earnings calls, press releases, internal communications. Each channel gets different information. Shareholders hear one version. Employees hear another. The public gets a third. Not because any version is false. Because different audiences need different messages. And controlling what each group knows lets the organization manage multiple realities simultaneously. Each crafted for a specific purpose. Relationships use information control constantly. Your partner asks about your day. You share some details. Omit others, not lies. Just selective disclosure. The information you release is accurate, but incomplete. And in that incompleteness, you maintain control over what they know about you. What they worry about. What they question. The control preserves autonomy. But it also creates distance, because they're making decisions based on partial information. And you've chosen which parts they get to see. The mechanism depends on privileged access. You can only control information you possess. So the first step is ensuring you're the source, the authority, the one with access. Once established, you can regulate flow. Release information strategically. Drip it out. Bundle bad news with good. Time announcements for maximum or minimum impact. Each decision shapes how the information lands, and how it gets integrated into understanding. What makes information control powerful is that it's invisible while it's working. You don't know what you don't know. The person controlling information doesn't announce which pieces they're withholding. They just share what serves their purpose. And you, receiving only that curated subset, construct your understanding from incomplete data. The control shapes your reality without you recognizing it's been shaped. The risk is asymmetry. The controller knows the full picture. The control doesn't. That imbalance creates power. And power corrupts communication. Because once you have control, maintaining it becomes the priority. Not truth. Not transparency. Not relationship. Control. And every interaction becomes an opportunity to manage information flow. To decide what others know. To shape reality through selective disclosure. Until the gap between what's known and what's shared becomes so wide that meaningful communication is impossible. Selective disclosure. You tell the truth. Just not all of it. You share the parts that help, hide the parts that hurt. The disclosure is real, accurate, but strategic. You've chosen what gets revealed based on how it serves you. And in that choosing, you've created a partial picture. One that looks complete but isn't. One that guides understanding in the direction you want it to go. Selective disclosure. Revealing some information while withholding other information to create a specific impression. It's truth as a tool. You're not lying. You're curating. Choosing which facts to bring forward, which to leave in shadow. The disclosed information is genuine. The undisclosed information is equally genuine, but only one set gets shared. And that selection shapes perception as effectively as any lie. Watch it in financial reporting. A company highlights revenue growth, posts it prominently. Makes sure everyone sees the increase, but they bury the debt, the declining margins, the unsustainable overhead. All the information is in the report, technically disclosed, but the emphasis guides attention. The positive gets spotlighted, the negative gets footnoted. The selective disclosure creates an impression of health even when the full picture is concerning. Dating operates this way in early stages. You share your successes, your interests, your best stories. You don't volunteer your failures, your anxieties, your worst moments, not because you're lying, because you're selecting, choosing which version of yourself to present. The disclosed facts are true. The undisclosed ones are true too. But only one set is visible, and that selection manages how you're perceived. At least until the undisclosed parts eventually surface. Legal contexts formalize this. Discovery requests ask for information. The response provides what's requested, but only what's requested. If the question is narrow, the disclosure is narrow. Relevant information that wasn't specifically asked for stays hidden. It's not perjury. It's selective disclosure. The letter of the requirement is met. The spirit isn't. But legally, the letter is what counts. What makes selective disclosure effective is that it exploits assumptions. When someone discloses information, we assume they're disclosing the relevant information, not just the convenient information. That assumption is wrong. Selective disclosure provides truth, just not complete truth. And the incompleteness is deliberate, calculated, designed to guide you toward a conclusion while protecting the discloser from accusation of dishonesty. The psychology is appealing. You get to maintain your self-image as honest while still managing perception. You disclosed. You told the truth. If others drew incorrect conclusions from incomplete information, that's not your fault. You're not responsible for what you didn't say, only for what you did, and what you said was accurate. The moral weight feels lighter than lying, even though the manipulative effect is identical. Here's the cost. Selective disclosure trains people to distrust everything you say. Not because any individual statement is false, because they've learned that what you share isn't the whole story. It's the version you want them to hear. So they start asking better questions, pushing for what you're not saying, assuming there's always something being withheld. And they're right. There is. Because selective disclosure, once it becomes habit, is hard to abandon. You've learned it works. And what works gets repeated. Concealment. The evidence exists. The information is there. But you're making sure no one finds it. Not destroying it. That would be too obvious. Just hiding it. Placing it where people won't look. Burying it under layers of irrelevant material. Making access difficult enough that most people give up before they reach it. The concealment isn't about eliminating truth. It's about making truth inaccessible. Concealment. The active hiding of information to prevent discovery. It's more than omission. Omission is passive. You just don't mention something. Concealment is active. You're taking steps to ensure the information stays hidden. Organizing it in ways that obscure it. Creating barriers to access. Making discovery as difficult as possible without completely eliminating the material. Government documents get concealed through classification and redaction. The information exists, but it's locked behind clearance levels, procedures, bureaucracy. The concealment protects national security, theoretically. But it also protects agencies from accountability, because information that can't be accessed can't be challenged. The concealment creates a shield, one that's legal, procedural, but functionally equivalent to deletion. Corporate concealment looks different. Financial irregularities get buried in complex accounting. The numbers are all there, in the reports, filed properly, but spread across subsidiaries, categorized in ways that obscure their meaning, explained in technical language most people can't pass. The concealment isn't illegal. It's strategic, making sure the full picture never comes together unless someone has the expertise and time to reconstruct it. Personal concealment operates in smaller ways. You hide your phone when your partner enters the room. Not because there's anything incriminating, just because you don't want questions. The concealment is reflexive, automatic. The behavior itself creates suspicion, because why hide something innocent? But the concealment continues, because revealing feels more threatening than the suspicion of hiding. The mechanism exploits limited resources. People have finite time, finite attention, finite energy. Effective concealment makes discovery expensive. You bury the relevant information under mountains of irrelevant material. Someone determined enough could find it. But determination has costs, and most people won't pay those costs. They'll accept the surface presentation. Move on. The concealment wins through attrition. What makes concealment insidious is how it maintains deniability. You didn't lie. You didn't destroy evidence. Everything is technically available, if someone wants to find it badly enough. The fact that you've made it nearly impossible to find isn't your problem. You provided access. Just not easy access. And difficulty of access, while suspicious, isn't proof of wrongdoing. It's just inconvenient. Strategic inconvenience. The cost accumulates slowly. Each concealment requires energy, remembering what's hidden where, maintaining the systems that keep things obscured, ensuring people don't accidentally stumble onto what you've buried. The cognitive load grows. And with it, the risk, because complex concealment systems have failure points. One slip, one overlooked access path, one person persistent enough, and the entire structure collapses, not just revealing the hidden information, revealing the effort that went into hiding it, which often looks worse than what was concealed. Camouflaging. It's right there, in plain sight, but you don't see it because it looks like everything else around it. The thing you're searching for is present, visible, just disguised as something unremarkable, something that belongs. The camouflage doesn't hide the object, it hides the significance, makes it blend. Appear normal. Until you know what you're looking for, it's invisible despite being completely exposed. Camouflaging. Hiding information or behavior by making it appear ordinary, expected, or innocuous. The deception isn't in removal. It's in presentation. You take something significant and dress it up as mundane. The observer sees it, but doesn't recognize it, because it's wearing the costume of normalcy. And normalcy is invisible. We don't scrutinize what appears routine. Financial fraud uses this extensively. Embezzlement doesn't show up as theft in the books. It shows up as consulting fees, vendor payments, operating expenses, normal categories, normal amounts. Spread across time, each transaction looks legitimate, ordinary. The camouflage is in classification. Money is moving, but it's moving in ways that look like business as usual. No red flags, no obvious anomalies, just normal operations, except they're not. Workplace camouflaging happens constantly. Someone's underperforming, but they're visible in meetings, responding to emails, creating the appearance of productivity. The actual work isn't getting done, but the performance of work is convincing. They look busy. Sound engage. The camouflage is inactivity without output. And because business resembles productivity, the distinction gets missed. Until deadlines arrive and there's nothing to show. Relationships camouflage avoidance as business. You don't want to deal with an issue. So you stay busy, work late, schedule commitments. Fill your time with legitimate activities. Each individual thing is real, necessary, even. But collectively they create distance. The camouflage is perfect because each piece is genuine. Your partner can't accuse you of avoiding them when you're genuinely busy. Except the business is strategic. Unconsciously, maybe. But serving the purpose of camouflaging withdrawal. The tactic works because we don't question the ordinary. If something looks like it belongs, we assume it does. The camouflage exploits that assumption. By making the significant appear insignificant, by disguising the anomalous as normal, the deceiver moves freely. The behavior or information is exposed, but unrecognized, hidden in plain sight through the simple act looking like it should be there. What makes camouflaging particularly effective is that it's almost impossible to catch without prior suspicion. If you're looking for something specific, you might find it despite the camouflage. But if you're not looking, if you have no reason to question what appears normal, you'll pass right over it. The camouflaged element sits there, visible, undetected, because detection requires recognizing that something ordinary is actually extraordinary. and that recognition requires already knowing what to look for. The vulnerability emerges when patterns accumulate. One camouflaged instance looks normal. 10 look suspicious. The repetition creates a signature. An observer might not catch the first one, or the second, but by the 5th or 10th, the pattern becomes visible. The camouflage starts to look deliberate. And once someone recognizes the pattern, they can't unsee it. Suddenly, all the normal transactions look coordinated. All the legitimate business looks like avoidance. The camouflage fails. Not because it was poorly executed, because it was used too often. False memory implantation. You remember it clearly. The details are vivid. Where you were, who was there, what happened. The memory feels real. Solid, except it's not. It never happened. Someone planted it, suggested it, reinforced it, and your brain, eager to fill gaps and create coherence, built the rest. Now you have a memory of something that didn't occur, and you'd swear it did. False memory implantation. The process of creating memories of events that never happened through suggestion, leading questions, or repeated exposure to false information. It's not about forgetting what's real. It's about remembering what isn't. The implanted memory feels identical to genuine ones, because your brain constructs both the same way. And once constructed, the false memory becomes part of your history, indistinguishable from truth. The mechanism is simpler than it should be. Memory isn't a recording. It's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, you're rebuilding it from fragments. And in that rebuilding, you're vulnerable to suggestion. Someone asks, "Do you remember when we went to that restaurant by the water?" You don't. But the question plants a seed. You start imagining it. The seed grows. Details accumulate. Soon, you're not imagining anymore. You're remembering. Except the memory is built from the suggestion, not from experience. Interrogations exploit this. Investigators ask leading questions. When you saw the suspect run from the building, which direction did they go? You didn't see anyone run, but the question assumes you did. It suggests a reality, and your mind, under pressure, starts filling in blanks. You construct a memory that fits the question. Not because you're lying, because your brain is trying to be helpful, to provide the information being requested, even if it has to create it. Therapy can trigger this unintentionally. A therapist suggests a possible explanation for current issues. Childhood trauma. Suppressed memories. The suggestion is gentle, but persistent. And over time, the patient starts remembering events that align with the suggested narrative. The memories feel real, emotionally charged, detailed, but they're constructed from suggestion and imagination, not recovered from actual experience. What makes false memory implantation dangerous is how convincing the result is. The person with the implanted memory isn't lying. They genuinely believe it happened. They can describe it in detail. Feel the emotions associated with it. The memory has all the qualities of a real one, because to the brain it is real. The implantation is complete. The false has become fact, at least in the mind of the person remembering it. Relationships suffer from this in subtle ways. You have a fight. Later, you discuss what was said. Your partner remembers you saying something you didn't. They're certain. They can quote you. But you never said it. What happened? During the fight, in the heat of the moment, they interpreted something you said as something else. That interpretation got encoded. And now, when they remember the fight, they remember the interpretation as a direct quote. The false memory has replaced the actual event. The broader implication is unsettling. If memory is this malleable, this vulnerable to suggestion, how much of what you remember actually happened the way you think it did? How many of your memories have been shaped, reinforced, or implanted by external suggestions? The answer is uncomfortable, more than you'd like to believe, because memory isn't a vault. It's a story you keep retelling. And every retelling is an opportunity for the story to change. Confabulation. They're not lying. They genuinely believe what they're saying. But it's not true. Not entirely. They're filling gaps in their memory with invented details. Creating coherent narratives from fragmented recall. The confabulation feels like remembering. It's delivered with the confidence of someone recounting facts. But the facts are manufactured, built by a brain trying to make sense of incomplete information. Confabulation. The production of fabricated or distorted memories without conscious intention to deceive. It's memory error, but it's active error. Your brain doesn't just forget. It improvises. Creates plausible explanations to fill holes. Those explanations feel like memories. Get treated as memories, but they're inventions. Your mind patching gaps with fiction that fits the narrative. Brain injuries can cause this dramatically. Someone asks a patient where they were yesterday. The patient doesn't remember, but instead of saying so, they confabulate. Provide a detailed answer, a trip to the store, a visit with a friend. The story is coherent, confident, completely false. The patient isn't lying. Their brain is generating content to answer the question, and the patient distinguishes the generated content from real memory. But confabulation isn't limited to brain injury. It happens in normal cognition constantly. You meet someone at a party. Later, you tell a friend about it. In the retelling, you add details. Where exactly you were standing. What the person was wearing. Small touches that make the story better. Some of those details are real. Others are confabulated. Your brain filling in what it doesn't actually remember to create a complete picture. And you can't tell which is which. Eyewitness testimony is plagued by this. Someone sees a crime. Weeks later, they're asked to describe it. They provide details. Confident. Specific. But some of those details are confabulated. The brain filling gaps with what seems plausible. The witness isn't lying. They genuinely believe their account. But parts of it are manufactured. Created post-event to make the memory coherent. And those confabulated details can send an investigation in the wrong direction. What makes confabulation tricky is that it's involuntary. You're not choosing to make things up. Your brain is doing it automatically. Trying to create coherence. And it's good at it. The confabulated details blend seamlessly with real memories. They feel authentic, come with the same sense of certainty. You have no reliable way to separate what you actually remember from what your brain invented to fill gaps. Relationships navigate this constantly. You remember your partner being upset about something. You can recall the conversation, what was said, how it felt. But when you bring it up later, they have no memory of it. You're certain it happened. They're certain it didn't. Who's right? Possibly neither. Your memory might be partially confabulated. Details from different conversations merged. Emotional states from one event are taken to another. The brain creating a coherent memory from scattered fragments. None of it intentional. All of it real to you. The challenge is calibration. If confabulation is normal, if everyone does it, how do you trust your own memory? How do you distinguish between what you actually experienced and what your brain filled in? The uncomfortable answer is you often can't. Memory feels certain. But that certainty isn't evidence of accuracy. It's just evidence that your brain has constructed a coherent story. Whether that story matches what actually happened is a different question. Reality manipulation. Small changes, one at a time, each subtle enough to seem normal. But over time, the accumulation shifts everything. What was becomes what is. And because the changes were gradual, you didn't notice the transition. By the time you realize reality has been altered, you can't remember what it was before. The manipulation is complete. and you can't prove it happened because your baseline has been rewritten. Reality manipulation. The gradual alteration of someone's perception of events, facts, or circumstances to create a different version of what's real. It's not a single lie. It's systematic revision, layer upon layer of small adjustments until the original truth is buried under the manufactured version. And because it happens incrementally, resistance never builds. Each change is too small to fight, until fighting becomes impossible because you've lost track of what you're fighting for. Abusive relationships master this. The manipulation starts small. Your partner questions a memory. Just once. Suggests you're being too sensitive. Just once. Reframes an argument you clearly won as one you lost. Just once. None of these instances is large enough to confront. They're dismissible, but they accumulate. Each one shifting your baseline slightly, eroding your confidence in your own perception, until you're regularly doubting yourself, accepting their version over yours, not because they're right, because they've systematically undermined your ability to trust your own read of reality. Political gaslighting operates similarly but at scale. A statement is made, then denied. Then the denial is denied. The contradictions pile up. Each one individually could be explained away. A mistake. A miscommunication. But collectively they create confusion. What was actually said becomes unclear. The goal isn't to establish a single false narrative. It's to make objective reality feel uncertain. To create an environment where facts are negotiable. And in that uncertainty, truth loses its authority. Organizations manipulate reality through controlled information flow. Performance metrics get redefined. Success criteria shift. What was a problem last month becomes acceptable this month. Not through announcement, through subtle reframing. Each adjustment presented as clarification. But the cumulative effect is reality revision. Standards have changed. Expectations have changed. And if you complain, you're told nothing's different. You're misremembering. Being inflexible. The manipulation hides in the gaps between official positions and actual practice. What makes reality manipulation effective is plausible deniability at each step. No single change is dramatic enough to prove manipulation. Each adjustment has a reasonable explanation. You can't point to one moment and say, "This is where the lie happened," because there isn't one moment. There are hundreds, thousands, each small enough to defend. But together they've rewritten what's real. And by the time you notice, you're arguing against a version of reality that's been normalized. That has momentum. That feels established. The cost is disorientation. When reality gets manipulated, you lose your anchor. You can't trust your memory. Can't trust your perception. Can't trust the information you're given. Everything becomes provisional, subject to revision. And in that instability, you become dependent on external sources to tell you what's real. Which is exactly what the manipulator wants. Once you're dependent on them to define reality, they control not just what you know. They control what you think you know. And the difference between those two is where your autonomy used to be. Credibility theater. They look the part. Sound the part. Have the credentials. The presentation is perfect. Professional. Authoritative. You're seeing someone who appears trustworthy. And appearances work. Because we use credibility signals as shortcuts. The right degree. The right tone. The right context. All of it signals expertise, knowledge, trustworthiness. Except sometimes the signals are performance. Credibility theater. Designed to look legitimate while having nothing substantial behind it. Credibility theater. The deliberate construction of trustworthiness through symbols, presentation, and context rather than through actual reliability or expertise. It's not about being credible. It's about appearing credible. And because we assess credibility through surface markers, the appearance is often enough. The theater works. Not because we're gullible, because credibility signals are supposed to be costly to fake. When they're not, when someone invests in the performance without the substance, they can harvest trust they haven't earned. Academic fraud lives here. Fake credentials, made-up degrees, citations to non-existent research. The fraud doesn't show up in casual interaction. The person sounds knowledgeable, uses proper terminology, references credible sounding sources. The theater is convincing because it mimics real expertise closely enough that spotting the difference requires verification. And most people don't verify. They accept the performance at face value. Financial scams run on credibility theater constantly. The fraudster presents themselves as successful. Luxury office. Designer clothes. Confident manner. The trappings of wealth signal success. And success signals competence. Trustworthiness. The theater creates the impression that this person knows what they're doing. Has access. Can deliver results. Investors hand over money based on the performance. And by the time the theater collapses, the money is gone. Social media amplifies this. Credentials in the bio, professional headshots, polished content. Each element builds credibility, but you can't verify any of it. The degree might be real, might be fabricated. The experience might be genuine, might be exaggerated. The theater is all you see, and it's designed to look legitimate. The person curates their presentation to signal expertise. Whether that expertise exists is secondary. The theater generates followers, influence, opportunities. Real credibility might follow. But it starts with performance. What makes credibility theater difficult to combat is that some level of presentation is necessary. Real experts use credibility signals too. Degrees, publications, professional appearance. The signals aren't inherently fraudulent. They become theater when they're all presentation and no substance. But from the outside, that distinction is hard to see. The person with real credentials and the person performing credentials look the same. Until something breaks. Until the lack of substance becomes visible. And by then, the theater has often already achieved its purpose. The trap for the performer is maintenance. Theater requires constant performance. You have to remember what you claimed. Keep stories straight. Avoid situations that would expose the gap between presentation and reality. The cognitive load is substantial, and the risk accumulates. Each interaction is an opportunity for the theater to fail, for someone to ask a question you can't answer, to verify a claim that won't hold. The theater can work for a while, but it's unstable, built on surface without foundation. And when it collapses completely. Moral licensing in deception. You did something good earlier, helped someone, made a charitable contribution, acted ethically in one context, and now, in a different context, you feel permission to cut corners, to bend truth, to deceive in small ways. The earlier good act creates a sense of credit, moral surplus. You've proven you're a good person, so this one small deception doesn't threaten that identity. You've earned the right to transgress. At least, that's what it feels like. Moral licensing in deception. The psychological phenomenon where past good behavior creates permission for future bad behavior. It's not conscious calculation. It's automatic balance. You've deposited moral capital. Now you can make a small withdrawal. The deception feels acceptable because you've already established your ethical credentials. The lie doesn't make you a liar. It makes you a good person having a momentary lapse. That distinction matters psychologically. It protects your self-concept while permitting behavior that would normally threaten it. Watch it operate in small moments. You're honest in a difficult conversation. Later that day, you exaggerate on your timesheet. The exaggeration feels minor. Because earlier you proved your integrity. The honesty created space for the small dishonesty. The two aren't connected logically. but psychologically they balance. The good act licenses the bad one, and you move through both without cognitive dissonance. Organizations exploit this structurally. A company touts its environmental initiatives, loudly, publicly, then quietly engages in practices that undermine those initiatives. The public messaging creates moral licensing. We're good corporate citizens. We care about sustainability. That established identity creates permission for behavior that contradicts it. Because the licensing isn't about actual ethics. It's about maintaining the appearance of ethics while creating space for exceptions. Relationships use moral licensing constantly. You do something thoughtful. Remember an anniversary. Help with a difficult task. That act creates credit. And later, when you're less attentive, less present, less considerate, the earlier good deed buffers criticism. You're not neglectful. You're just tired. And besides, remember how thoughtful you were last week. The licensing makes the subsequent behavior feel acceptable, even when it's part of a pattern. Because each good act resets the balance, creates new permission. The mechanism is self-serving. It lets you engage in behavior that conflicts with your values while maintaining your self-image as someone who upholds those values. The licensing creates cognitive flexibility. You can be honest and dishonest, ethical and unethical, good and bad. The contradiction doesn't register as contradiction. It registers as balance, as human, as normal, because the licensing smooths the edges, makes the inconsistency feel consistent. What makes moral licensing particularly insidious is how it enables escalation. Small deceptions get licensed by small good acts. Then slightly larger deceptions need slightly larger good acts to license them. The pattern grows. Not dramatically, gradually. Each step feeling justified by the licensing that preceded it. Until you're engaging in significant deception, while still maintaining the identity of an honest person. Because you've built a structure of licensing. Each tier supporting the next. Each good act creating permission for acts that would have been unthinkable without the foundation of moral credit. The cost is self-deception. You're not seeing your behavior clearly. The licensing obscures the pattern. You focus on the good acts, their honest moments, the ethical choices. Those feel representative. Define who you are. The licensed deceptions feel like exceptions. Momentary. Situational. Not indicative of character. But if you step back, if you look at the full picture, the exceptions might be as frequent as the rule. The licensed behavior might be as defining as the licensing behavior. But the licensing prevents you from seeing that. Keeps you convinced you're fundamentally good, even when your actions tell a different story. Bluffing. You don't have it. The resources, the information, the capability. But you act like you do. Project confidence. Make bold claims. Create the impression of strength where none exists. The bluff is a calculated risk. If they believe you, you win. If they call you, you lose. But often they don't call, because calling requires certainty. And you've created enough doubt that certainty feels risky. So they fold, and the bluff works. Not because you had anything, because they believed you did. Bluffing. Presenting a false appearance of strength, knowledge, or capability to achieve an advantage. It's deception through performance. You're not lying outright. You're implying, suggesting, letting others draw conclusions that favor you. And because those conclusions are drawn by them, not stated by you, the bluff maintains deniability. You never said you had it, they just assumed, and you let them. Poker makes this visible. You have weak cards, but you bet confidently. Raise aggressively. The other players read your behavior. Confident betting signals strong cards. They fold. Not because your cards were strong. Because your behavior convinced them your cards were strong. The bluff succeeded. You won the hand, not with cards, with performance. Business negotiations run on bluffing constantly. You're asked if you have other offers. You don't. But you imply you do. We're considering several options. Technically true. You are considering options. One of those options is this offer. But the phrasing suggests multiple interested parties. Competition. The implication creates pressure. The other side improves their offer to stay competitive. The bluff worked. You gained leverage from a position you didn't actually have. Relationships bluff in subtler ways. You're upset about something. Your partner asks what's wrong. Nothing. The bluff is that you're fine. You're not. But admitting it feels vulnerable. So you perform fine. The bluff creates distance. Protects you from having the difficult conversation. Until the bluff fails. Until they stop asking. Accept the performance as reality. And then you're upset they don't care. When really they believed your bluff. What makes bluffing effective is that calling it requires risk. If you call a bluff and you're wrong, you lose. So people only call when they're certain. And certainty is rare. Most situations have ambiguity. The bluffer exploits that ambiguity. Creates the impression of strength. And bets that others won't risk calling without certainty. Often they're right. The bluff goes unchallenged. Becomes accepted as fact. And the bluffer gains advantage they didn't earn. The danger for the bluffer is overcorrection. Once a bluff works, it's tempting to bluff again. And again. Each successful bluff reinforces the tactic. Until bluffing becomes default. You bluff even when you don't need to. Even when honesty would serve you better. The habit becomes compulsive. And eventually someone calls. Not because they're certain. Because they're willing to risk being wrong. And when the bluff gets called, when the lack of substance gets exposed, credibility collapses. Not just for that bluff. For everything. Because now people know you bluff. And once that's known, every claim gets questioned. Every assertion gets tested. The bluffing that worked becomes the thing that destroys your ability to be believed. The cost accumulates invisibly. Each bluff erodes trust slightly. People might not call you, but they remember the performance. The gap between presentation and reality. And over time, those memories accumulate. You're seen as someone who performs, who exaggerates, who can't be taken at face value. The bluffing succeeded tactically, but strategically it isolated you. Put you in a position where even truth sounds like performance. Where honesty gets treated as another bluff. And at that point, you've lost something more valuable than any individual bluff could gain. You've lost the ability to be believed. Fraud psychology. It starts with opportunity. Access to something valuable. Money. Information. Trust. Then comes rationalization. You're underpaid. They won't miss it. Everyone does it. The fraud doesn't feel like fraud. It feels like taking what you're owed. Correcting an imbalance. And once that first line is crossed, each subsequent step gets easier. The rationalization builds. The opportunity expands. Until you're not just bending rules. You're systematically stealing, and still telling yourself it's justified. Fraud psychology. The mental processes that enable someone to engage in deliberate deception for material gain while maintaining their self-concept as a moral person. It's not about lacking ethics. It's about reframing theft as something else. Something acceptable. The fraud is real. The harm is real. But in the mind of the fraudster, it's been reconstructed. Made legitimate through layers of justification that insulate them from guilt. The pattern follows a sequence. First, pressure, financial stress, performance expectations, the need to maintain appearances. That pressure creates motive. Then comes opportunity, weak oversight, complex systems. Gaps in accountability. Access without checks. The opportunity makes fraud possible. But neither pressure nor opportunity alone causes fraud. The final element is rationalization, the psychological reframing that makes the act feel permissible. Watch how rationalization operates. An accountant starts moving small amounts, just borrowing it. I'll pay it back. The intention to return it makes it feel less like theft, except they don't pay it back. Because when the time comes, there's always a reason to delay. Another expense. Another pressure. The borrowed money becomes permanent theft, but the original rationalization, the intention to return it, stays active, protecting them from recognizing what they've become. Corporate fraud builds on this. Executives manipulate earnings. We're just smoothing volatility. Managing investor expectations. The reframe transforms fraud into prudent management. The harm to investors, to employees, to the market gets abstracted away, becomes collateral damage in the service of stability. The fraud is systematic, deliberate, but framed as responsible stewardship. And that framing is what allows it to continue. What makes fraud psychology particularly effective is how it adapts. When one rationalization stops working, another emerges. I deserve this. They're doing it too. No one's really getting hurt. The system is rigged anyway. Each justification protects the self-concept, allows the fraud to continue without triggering the guilt that would normally stop it. The fraudster isn't evil. They're human, using the same cognitive tools everyone uses, just deploying them in service of theft. The escalation is gradual but relentless. Small frauds prove the system is vulnerable, build confidence, reduce fear. Each success makes the next attempt feel safer. The amounts grow. The methods become more sophisticated. The rationalization expands to cover larger transgressions. And the fraudster, deep in the pattern, often can't see how far they've gone, because each step felt justified. Each decision felt reasonable. The cumulative effect is massive fraud. But from inside the psychology, it's just a series of small, defensible choices. The collapse, when it comes, is devastating. Not just legally or financially, psychologically. The rationalizations that protected the self-concept stop working. The fraud becomes undeniable. And the person who maintained their self-image as moral, as justified, as correcting unfairness, has to reconcile that with the reality of systematic theft. Some never do. Hold on to the rationalizations even after conviction, because abandoning them means admitting what they became. And that admission is harder than any sentence. Duping strategy. The plan isn't to get caught. It's to never give them reason to look. You build trust first. Establish credibility. Show reliability. The strategy is long-term, patient. You're not rushing the deception. You're creating the conditions where deception becomes invisible. Because trusted people don't get scrutinized. Their explanations get accepted. Their actions get the benefit of the doubt. And that's the opening. That's where the duping happens. Duping strategy. The deliberate, methodical approach to deceiving someone through careful planning, relationship building and exploitation of trust. It's not impulsive lying. It's engineered deception. Every interaction serves the larger goal. Building credibility. Reducing suspicion. Creating the environment where the eventual deception will go undetected. The strategy recognizes that successful deception isn't about the lie. It's about the context the lie happens in. The sequence starts with assessment. Who's the target? What do they value? What are their vulnerabilities? Trust assessment comes next. How much oversight do they provide? How much do they verify? What's their baseline for suspicion? The strategy maps these variables, identifies the weak points, the places where deception can enter without triggering defensive responses. Then comes the relationship phase. This is where most strategies succeed or fail. You can't dupe someone who doesn't trust you. So you build that trust. Deliberately. Consistently, small favors. Reliable behavior. Transparency on unimportant matters. Each action deposits credibility. builds the account you'll eventually withdraw from. The relationship isn't genuine. It's instrumental. But it looks and feels genuine, because the strategy requires it to. Financial fraud follows this religiously. The con artist doesn't start with the scam. They start with friendship, shared interests, common ground. They're likable, helpful, trustworthy. Weeks or months pass. The relationship solidifies. And only then, when trust is established, does the opportunity arise. An investment, a business venture, something requiring money. The ask feels reasonable because the relationship feels solid. The strategy makes the deception possible. The trust is what gets exploited. Workplace strategies look different but function similarly. Someone wants to embezzle. They don't start stealing. They start becoming indispensable. Taking on extra responsibilities, volunteering for complex tasks, building a reputation as reliable and competent. That reputation creates space, less oversight, more autonomy. And in that space, the deception begins. Small at first, then larger, but always protected by the credibility the strategy built. What makes duping strategy particularly effective is its patience. Impulsive deception gets caught. Strategic deception builds infrastructure, creates multiple layers of protection. The relationship provides cover. The credibility deflects suspicion. The proven reliability makes verification seem unnecessary. By the time the deception is discovered, if it's discovered, the strategy has often achieved its goal. The trust has been harvested. The damage is done. The cost to the duper is the performance. Living the strategy requires constant attention. You're always on, always managing the relationship, always reinforcing the credibility. The cognitive load is substantial, and the isolation is profound, because the relationship isn't real. You're performing connection while remaining fundamentally separate. That separation, that knowledge that everything is strategy, erodes something. You become unable to form genuine relationships because you've trained yourself to see every interaction as potential leverage. And that training doesn't turn off just because you want it to. Feigning innocence. You know exactly what you did, but you look them in the eye with perfect confusion. What are you talking about? The performance is flawless. Hurt. Bewildered, maybe even a little offended that they'd suggest such a thing. The innocence isn't real. But the performance is convincing enough that they start doubting their own accusation. And in that doubt, the feigned innocence succeeds. Feigning innocence. The deliberate performance of not knowing or not being responsible for something you clearly know or caused. It's not passive ignorance. It's active performance. You're constructing the appearance of innocence through expression, tone, and behavior designed to signal confusion rather than guilt. The strategy exploits a basic assumption. Innocent people look confused when accused, so you perform confusion. And the performance becomes evidence of innocence. Children master this instinctively. Caught with a broken vase, they stare with wide eyes. I didn't do it. The performance includes the words but relies on the delivery. The expression of surprise. The absence of defensive behavior. The apparent genuine confusion about why they're being accused. Parents often can't tell if the child is lying or truthful. The feigned innocence is that good, because children haven't learned to second-guess the performance. They commit fully. Adults refine the technique. Someone at work is accused of undermining a colleague. They don't get defensive. They lean into confusion. I'm shocked you think that. I've always supported them. The shock performs innocence. The specific denial performs credibility. And the reference to past support creates doubt. Maybe the accusation is wrong. Maybe the accuser misread the situation. The feigned innocence doesn't just deny. It reframes the accusation as baseless. Relationships weaponize this regularly. You're confronted about something you clearly did. Instead of admitting it, you perform hurt. I can't believe you'd accuse me of that. After everything we've been through, the performance shifts the dynamic. Now they're the one being cruel. Making baseless accusations. Hurting you unfairly. The feigned innocence becomes a counterattack. And often, it works. The accuser backs down. Apologizes. And the original issue gets buried under the guilt they feel for making the accusation. What makes feigned innocence effective is how it exploits uncertainty. Unless there's definitive proof, accusers operate on suspicion. Strong suspicion, maybe. But still suspicion. The feigned innocence introduces doubt. And humans are wired to give the benefit of that doubt, especially when the accused performs innocence convincingly. The internal logic goes, innocent people would react this way. This person is reacting this way. Therefore, they might be innocent. The syllogism is flawed, but it's persuasive. The risk is overuse. Feign innocence once, it might work. Feign it repeatedly and a pattern emerges. People start recognizing the performance, the hurt expression, the confused tone, the shocked denial. They've seen it before. And once they recognize it as performance, the tactic stops working. Every denial gets treated as confirmation. Every expression of confusion gets read as guilt. The feigned innocence that protected you becomes the thing that convicts you. The deeper cost is internal. When you habitually feign innocence, the boundary between performance and reality blurs. You start believing your own denials. Convinced yourself you're being unfairly accused. The feigned confusion becomes real confusion. You genuinely can't understand why they think you're guilty. Not because you're innocent. Because you've performed innocence so thoroughly you've lost access to the truth. The performance has consumed the performer. And what's left is someone who can't distinguish between what they did and what they claim they didn't do. Narrative control. They're not lying about the facts. They're shaping how the facts are understood. The sequence gets rearranged. Emphasis shifts. Context gets added or removed. By the time they're done, the same events tell a completely different story. One that serves their interests, protects their image, assigns blame elsewhere. The facts haven't changed, but the narrative has. And narratives are what people remember. Narrative control. The strategic shaping of how events are framed, sequenced, and interpreted to guide perception toward a desired conclusion. It's not about creating false information. It's about controlling true information. Selecting which facts get highlighted, which get minimized, how they're connected, what meaning gets assigned. The controller doesn't change what happened. They change what it means. Politicians live in this space. A policy fails. The narrative control begins immediately. The failure gets reframed as unexpected complications. The cause gets shifted from poor planning to external factors. Opponents get blamed for obstruction. Each element is factually defensible. But collectively they construct a narrative where the failure becomes evidence of the need for the policy. Not evidence against it. The facts support both interpretations. Narrative control determines which one dominates. Corporate communications operate identically. Earnings miss projections. The narrative frames it as industry-wide challenges. Strategic repositioning. Investment in future growth. The miss is real. But the narrative transforms it from failure to calculated adjustment. Shareholders hear resilience, not weakness. The narrative control protects stock price, maintains confidence, and buys time for actual corrections. Personal relationships use narrative control constantly. An argument happens. Later, when discussing it, each person controls their narrative. You emphasize what they said. Minimize what you said. Frame your actions as reactions to their behavior. They do the same in reverse. Neither narrative is false. But neither is complete. Each is strategically constructed. And the gap between narratives becomes the new argument. Not about what happened. About what it meant. The mechanism relies on selective emphasis. You can't include everything when telling a story. Some details get highlighted. Others get background. Narrative control is making those choices strategically. Highlighting what helps. Backgrounding what hurts. The selection feels natural. Necessary for coherence. But it's serving an agenda. Shaping understanding. Creating the version of events that positions you favorably. What makes narrative control powerful is its invisibility. The audience doesn't see the selection process. They just see the narrative. And if it's coherent, if it hangs together, they accept it. The controller has shaped their understanding without them recognizing the shaping happened. The facts feel objective. The interpretation feels inevitable. But both were guided, deliberately, toward a conclusion the controller wanted from the start. The vulnerability is competing narratives. When multiple people control narrative around the same events, contradictions emerge. The discrepancies reveal that narrative is being controlled. That the story being told isn't the only possible story. And once that becomes visible, all narratives lose authority. People stop trusting any single version. Start looking for the facts beneath the framing. The narrative control that worked when it was singular fails when it's plural. Because the existence of competing narratives proves that narrative is a choice, not a truth. Image repaired. The damage is done. Your reputation is compromised. Trust is broken. And now the work begins. Not fixing what caused the damage. Fixing how the damage is perceived. You're not changing what happened. You're changing what it means. Recontextualizing the failure. Reframing the error. Restoring the image. Even if the underlying problem persists. Image repair. The strategic communication designed to restore reputation after it's been damaged by wrongdoing, failure, or scandal. It's not about accountability. It's about perception management. The goal isn't to make things right. It's to make things look right, or at least less wrong. The tactics vary, but the purpose is constant. Protect the image. Minimize the damage. Get the reputation back to functional. Whatever the cost to truth. The strategies follow patterns. Denial comes first. It didn't happen. If denial isn't viable, shift to evasion. I don't recall. If evasion fails, minimize. It wasn't as bad as claimed. If minimization doesn't work, justify. There were reasons, and if nothing else works, apologize. But the apology is image repair too. Carefully worded. Limited in scope. Designed to signal contrition without admitting liability. Celebrity scandals showcase this. Something damaging surfaces. The image repair response is immediate. A statement gets released. Calculated. Every word vetted. If the scandal is undeniable, the statement expresses regret. But vague regret. I'm sorry for any hurt caused. Not sorry for the action. Sorry for the reaction. The language creates the appearance of accountability while avoiding actual admission. The image repair preserves legal protection while performing social contrition. Corporate image repair follows similar scripts. A company faces backlash, product failure, ethical violation, environmental damage. The response prioritizes image repair over correction. Announce an investigation. Promise to do better. Highlight past good acts. Each move is strategic, designed to shift focus from the failure to the response, from what went wrong to how seriously it's being taken. The image repair doesn't fix the problem. It fixes how the problem affects perception. Personal relationships engage in image repair after breaks of trust. You hurt someone, broke a promise, violated a boundary. The image repair begins. You emphasize mitigating factors. Stress was high. Communication failed. You didn't understand the impact. Each explanation is image repair, rebuilding how you're seen. Not necessarily addressing the behavior, just reframing it, making it appear less damaging, more forgivable, more compatible with continued relationship. What makes image repair complicated is that sometimes it's necessary. Genuine mistakes happen. Misunderstandings occur. And repairing how those are perceived isn't inherently manipulative. It becomes manipulation when the repair prioritizes image over correction. When the goal is to appear better rather than to be better. That distinction matters. But from the outside, they look identical. Genuine repair and strategic image repair use the same language, the same tactics, the same emotional appeals. The trap is substitution. Image repair becomes the response instead of actual change. The appearance of addressing the problem replaces addressing the problem. And because image repair can be effective, because it can restore reputation without requiring substantive change, it becomes default. Why fix the underlying issue when you can fix how the issue is perceived? The image repair succeeds. The reputation recovers. But the behavior that damaged it continues, protected now by the appearance of having been addressed. Until the next damage, the next repair, the cycle repeating. Each time eroding the foundation a little more. Excuse-making. It wasn't your fault. There were factors outside your control. The instructions were unclear. The timeline was unreasonable. Other people dropped the ball. Each excuse is technically true, but collectively they construct a reality where you're never responsible, where failure always has external causes, and where the only consistent element in every story is your innocence. Excuse-making. The habitual generation of explanations that shift responsibility away from oneself and toward external circumstances, other people, or uncontrollable factors. It's not occasional context setting, it's systematic blame displacement. Every error gets explained. Every failure gets justified. And in each explanation, accountability migrates outward. Away from you, toward anything else. The pattern is recognizable. Something goes wrong. Before anyone asks, the excuses start. I would have finished, but the file was corrupted. I tried calling, but they didn't answer. The instructions changed at the last minute. Each statement might be true. But notice what's absent. Your role. Your choices. Your contribution to the outcome. The excuse preserves the image of you as competent and well-intentioned, blocked only by circumstances. Work environments breed this. Missed deadlines, incomplete projects, poor performance. The excuse maker has explanations for all of it. And because the explanations contain truth, they're hard to dismiss. There was a file corruption. The instructions did change. But plenty of people navigated the same challenges and delivered. The excuse maker is the only one who couldn't. But you wouldn't know that from their narrative. In their version, they're a victim of circumstance, not an underperformer. Relationships suffer from chronic excuse-making. Plans get cancelled. Work ran late. Promises get broken. I forgot. Hurt gets caused. I didn't realize you'd take it that way. Each excuse deflects responsibility. Frames the failure as something that happened to you, not something you did. And over time, the pattern becomes clear. You're never at fault. It's always something else. Some external factor. Some misunderstanding. Some unforeseeable complication. What makes excuse-making particularly corrosive is how it prevents growth. If you're never responsible, you never need to change. The excuses protect you from feedback. From self-examination. From the discomfort of acknowledging you messed up. That protection feels good short-term. But long-term, it locks you in place. Because improvement requires recognizing what you're doing wrong. And excuse-making systematically prevents that recognition. The social cost accumulates slowly. People hear the excuses, notice the pattern, and start discounting everything you say. Not because any individual excuse is unbelievable, because the consistency is. Everyone faces challenges. Not everyone responds with excuses. When you do, every time, it signals something, that you can't be trusted with responsibility. That problems will be explained, not solved. That accountability will be deflected, not accepted. The excuses might protect your self-image, but they destroy others' image of you. The internal cost is worse. When you habitually make excuses, you lose the ability to accurately assess your own performance. You can't see your weaknesses, because every weakness has been explained away. You can't identify patterns in your failures, because each failure was unique circumstances. The excuse-making creates a distorted self-image, one where you're consistently capable, just consistently unlucky. That distortion isn't just inaccurate. It's isolating, because the gap between how you see yourself and how others see you grows until there's no bridge between them. And you, insulated by excuses, never understand why. Justification. You did it. You know you did it, but it was necessary. The circumstances demanded it. Anyone in your position would have done the same. The justification flows easily, naturally, and it transforms the action from wrong to defensible, from questionable to reasonable. The behavior hasn't changed, but the frame around it has, and in that reframing, guilt dissolves. What remains is conviction that you made the right choice, even when you didn't. Justification, the process of constructing reasons that make morally questionable actions seem acceptable or necessary. It's not excuse-making. Excuses admit the action was wrong but claim it wasn't your fault. Justification denies the action was wrong at all. It was right. Given the circumstances, given the constraints, given what you knew at the time. The justification doesn't just explain the behavior. It legitimizes it. The mechanism starts with discomfort. You've done something that conflicts with your values. That creates cognitive dissonance, psychological tension. Your mind resolves that tension by adjusting the interpretation. The action wasn't actually bad. It was justified. The values haven't changed. But their application in this specific case required flexibility. And that flexibility is what justification provides. Watch it operate in workplace ethics. Someone lies to a client. Not a big lie. Just enough to close the deal. The justification builds immediately. The competition does worse. If I don't get this sale, I lose my job. The client would have bought anyway. Each statement might be true, but they're being deployed to transform deception into reasonable business practice. The lie is still a lie, but the justification makes it feel acceptable. Relationships justify boundary violations constantly. You check your partner's messages. The justification is ready. I had a feeling something was wrong. They've been distant lately. I need to know if they're being honest. The justification frames invasion of privacy as protective vigilance. The action remains the same. But the justification changes what it means. Makes it defensible, even noble. What makes justification powerful is how it protects self-concept. You're not a bad person. You're a person who made a difficult choice in complex circumstances. The justification preserves that identity, allows you to engage in behavior that would normally threaten your self-image without triggering the guilt that would stop it. You've reframed the action, and the reframe holds as long as the justification feels solid. The danger is escalation. Once you've justified one action, the framework exists to justify the next. The circumstances that made the first action necessary haven't changed. They might have gotten worse. So the second action becomes justified by the same logic. Then the third. Each justification making the next one easier, until you're engaging in systematic behavior that directly contradicts your stated values. But you don't see the contradiction, because each step was justified. Each decision was defensible. The pattern is invisible from inside the justification. The cost shows up in disconnection. The person you are and the person you think you are diverge. Your actions tell one story. Your justifications tell another. And you believe the justifications. Genuinely. You're convinced you're acting with integrity, making hard but necessary choices. Meanwhile, others see the gap. the disconnect between your claimed values and your actual behavior. They don't buy the justifications. To them, you're just rationalizing bad behavior. And that perception, that gap between how you see yourself and how you're seen, erodes trust, damages relationships, isolates you, while you remain convinced you're doing what's right. Denial. It didn't happen. Not the way they're describing it. They're misremembering, exaggerating, taking things out of context. You're certain. Because you were there. You know what actually occurred. And their version doesn't match yours. So their version must be wrong. The denial is absolute, confident, and presented with enough conviction that it creates doubt. Maybe they are misremembering. Maybe you're the one with the accurate account. Denial. The outright rejection of facts, events, or responsibility despite evidence. It's not confusion. It's assertion. You're not saying you don't remember. You're saying it didn't happen. Or it didn't happen that way. The denial is direct, unambiguous, and often delivered with the certainty that comes from believing your own version completely. The psychology behind denial is protective. Admitting the truth would require acknowledging something uncomfortable. Guilt, failure, wrongdoing. Denial sidesteps that discomfort. By rejecting the reality, you avoid the consequences. Not just external consequences, internal ones. The emotional weight of having done something wrong. Denial keeps that weight at bay. Addiction runs on denial. Someone's drinking is affecting their work, their relationships, their health. Everyone around them sees it. Confronted, they deny there's a problem. I can stop anytime. It's not affecting anything important. People are overreacting. The denial isn't tactical. It's sincere. They genuinely don't see what everyone else sees, because seeing it would mean admitting loss of control. And that admission is unbearable. Workplace denial looks different but functions similarly. A manager's decisions are causing team turnover. High performers are leaving. Morale is collapsing. Confronted with feedback, the manager denies responsibility. People leave for all kinds of reasons. The market is competitive. Those who left weren't the right fit anyway. Each denial deflects accountability. Reframes the pattern as external factors. The manager isn't the problem. The circumstances are. What makes denial particularly resistant to correction is how it's reinforced. When you deny something and face no immediate consequences, the denial appears validated. You said it didn't happen. Nothing catastrophic followed. Therefore, the denial must have been justified. The reinforcement makes the next denial easier, builds a pattern, until denial becomes the default response to any uncomfortable truth. Relationships corrode under chronic denial. One person raises an issue. The other denies it's real. I never said that. That's not what happened. You're being too sensitive. The denial invalidates the other person's experience, makes them question their own perception. And when that pattern repeats, when denial becomes the response to every concern, communication breaks down, because there's no shared reality to communicate about. Just competing versions. One acknowledged, one denied. The trap closes when denial becomes identity protecting. You're not someone who makes those mistakes. Who causes those problems? Who behaves that way? The denial isn't just about the specific incident. It's about preserving who you believe you are. And once denial serves that function, once it's protecting core identity rather than just avoiding discomfort, it becomes nearly impossible to abandon. Because abandoning the denial means abandoning the self-concept it's protecting. And that feels like psychological annihilation. Minimization. Yes, it happened. You're not denying that. But it wasn't as bad as they're making it sound. They're overreacting, making too much of it, blowing it out of proportion. You acknowledge the event, but you're reframing its significance, shrinking it, making it smaller, less important. less harmful. The minimization admits truth while denying impact, and in that gap between admission and dismissal, accountability disappears. Minimization. The deliberate downplaying of the severity, frequency, or impact of actions or events to reduce perceived responsibility. It's a middle ground between denial and admission. You're not saying it didn't happen. You're saying it wasn't a big deal. The acknowledgement creates the appearance of honesty while the minimization protects against consequences. The tactic shows up everywhere. Someone's late repeatedly. Confronted, they minimize. It was only a few minutes. True. But it was a few minutes every time. The minimization focuses on individual instances, ignores the pattern, makes each occurrence seem trivial, and in doing so, makes the overall behavior seem acceptable. Harm minimization is particularly common. You hurt someone, they tell you. Your response minimizes. I was just joking. It wasn't meant seriously. You're being too sensitive. The minimization doesn't deny you said it. It denies the legitimacy of their response, frames their hurt as overreaction. The harm shifts from your action to their interpretation. And once framed that way, you're off the hook. Organizations minimize failures institutionally. A product has issues. The minimization begins. Only a small percentage of users affected. The problem is minor. We're already working on a fix. Each statement is designed to shrink the significance, make the failure seem manageable, less alarming. The minimization controls narrative, prevents panic, protects reputation, even if it understates real harm. What makes minimization effective is how it exploits relativity. Anything can be made to seem small compared to something bigger. At least I didn't. Other people do worse. It could have been much more serious. The comparison makes the actual behavior seem reasonable, almost trivial. And that trivialization is the goal. Because trivial things don't require serious response, don't warrant consequences, don't threaten self-image. The pattern becomes habitual. Every mistake gets minimized. Every failure gets contextualized as minor. And over time, you lose the ability to accurately assess severity. Because everything gets run through the minimization filter, automatically, without conscious thought. Major issues get treated as minor inconveniences. Patterns of harm get dismissed as isolated incidents. And the gap between the impact you're having and the impact you're acknowledging grows until others stop bothering to bring things to your attention. Because they've learned their concerns will be minimized, dismissed, made to seem unreasonable. The internal cost is desensitization. When you habitually minimize, you dull your own emotional responses. You have to, because feeling the full weight of your actions would contradict the minimization. So you train yourself not to feel it, not to register the harm, not to take seriously the feedback. The minimization that started as a defense mechanism becomes a perceptual filter. And what you can't perceive, you can't change. Rationalization. After the fact, the logic emerges. Clear, compelling, explaining why what you did made sense. The rationalization isn't prepared in advance, it develops after the action. Retrospectively constructing coherence, making the choice seem reasoned, deliberate, even if at the time it was impulsive, emotional, poorly thought through. The rationalization rewrites history, makes the past fit a narrative where you were logical, thoughtful, in control. Rationalization, the construction of logical-sounding explanations for actions that were actually driven by other motives. It's not justification claiming the action was right. It's explanation claiming the action was reasonable. The rationalization creates a coherent story, one that makes your behavior understandable, even inevitable, given the circumstances and your reasoning at the time. The mechanism is post hoc. You act first. Then your mind goes to work explaining why. The explanation feels like it was there all along, like you were thinking through these reasons when you made the decision. But you weren't. The decision came from somewhere else. Emotion, impulse, habit. The rationalization is what your mind builds afterward to make sense of what you did. Watch someone make an impulsive purchase. Expensive, unnecessary. They feel buyer's remorse. But instead of admitting it was impulsive, they rationalize. I've been working hard. I deserve this. It's an investment. The price was too good to pass up. The rationalization transforms impulse into reasoned decision. And once that story is constructed, they believe it. The purchase becomes justified retroactively. Relationship decisions get rationalized constantly. You stay in something that's clearly not working. The rationalization builds. Things will get better. We've invested so much time. Breaking up would hurt them too much. Each reason sounds logical. But they're constructed after the decision to stay. The real reason might be fear, inertia, hope. But the rationalization provides cover. Makes the choice seem deliberate rather than default. What makes rationalization insidious is how convincing it is to the person doing it. You're not consciously lying. The reasons feel genuine. They came from your mind. They sound logical. So you trust them. Believe them. Use them to explain your behavior to yourself and others. The rationalization becomes the official story. And the actual motives, the real reasons you acted, get buried under the constructed logic. The danger is self-deception. When you habitually rationalize, you lose contact with your actual decision-making process. You think you're making reasoned choices based on clear logic. But you're not. You're acting on impulse, emotion, habit, then creating explanations afterward. The rationalization makes you believe you're more rational than you are, more in control, more deliberate. That false confidence is dangerous, because it means you're not actually examining your choices. You're just creating stories about them. The accumulation creates a gap between who you think you are and who you actually are. You think you're someone who makes thoughtful decisions, weighs options, acts on logic. The rationalizations support that self-image. But your actual behavior tells a different story. One of impulse, of emotion, of choices made for reasons you won't admit. That gap doesn't just affect how you see yourself. It affects how you're seen. Because others can spot the rationalization, the explanations that don't quite add up, the logic that's too neat, too convenient, too obviously constructed after the fact. And once they see it, they stop trusting your reasons. Stop believing your explanations. Stop accepting the story you tell about yourself. Selective memory claiming. You remember what serves you, clearly, in detail, the parts that make you look good, the moments that prove your point. Those memories are vivid, confident, but the parts that complicate the narrative, those are fuzzy, uncertain. Maybe they didn't happen quite that way. Or maybe they didn't happen at all. The selectivity isn't conscious, but it's systematic, and it shapes every dispute, every argument, every attempt to establish what actually occurred. Selective memory claiming, the tendency to remember and assert memories that support your position while forgetting or doubting memories that contradict it. It's not outright fabrication. The memories you claim are often real, but the selection is biased. You remember what helps, forget what hurts, and present the partial recall as complete truth. The mechanism is self-serving. Memory isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction. And that reconstruction is influenced by motivation. What you want to be true affects what you remember as true. Not consciously, but powerfully. Your mind emphasizes memories that align with your current needs, downplays ones that don't. The result is a version of the past that serves the present. Conveniently. Arguments run on this. Both people remember different versions. Not because one is lying, because each remembers selectively. You remember the hurtful thing they said. They remember the context that preceded it. You remember their promise. They remember the qualifier they attacked. Both memories are real, but partial. And each person's selection creates a narrative where they're right and the other person is wrong. Workplace disputes follow the same pattern. A project fails. The manager remembers warning the team, raising concerns. The team remembers those warnings being vague, contradicted by other directions. Both could be right. Memory is selective. The manager remembers the parts that show leadership. The team remembers the parts that show confusion. The selective claiming creates incompatible histories. Neither provably false. Neither completely true. What makes selective memory claiming difficult to counter is sincerity. The person isn't knowingly lying. They genuinely remember what they claim. The selection happened automatically, unconsciously. So when challenged, they're not defensive about deception. They're defensive about their memory being questioned. And that sincerity makes the claiming convincing. At least to them, the pattern reinforces itself. When you claim a memory and it goes unchallenged, that memory gets strengthened, becomes more certain, more detailed. The claiming makes it more real, and future reconstructions build on that strengthened version, until the selective memory becomes your truth. Not just what you claim, what you genuinely believe happened. Relationships deteriorate under this. Each person has their version, built from selective memory, claimed with full confidence. And because both versions feel true to the people holding them, neither will concede. The past becomes contested territory. Every shared experience has two histories, neither reconcilable. And in that disconnect, in the impossibility of establishing shared truth, trust erodes. Because if you can't agree on what happened, you can't agree on what it meant. Can't learn from it. Can't move past it. The selective claiming locks you both in competing realities, each certain, each incomplete, each served by the memories chosen and the memories forgotten. Ambiguous accountability. Who's responsible? The question should have an answer, but it doesn't. Not clearly. The lines are blurred. The roles overlap. The decisions were collective. No single person can be pinned down. And in that ambiguity, accountability dissolves. Everyone and no one. Shared responsibility that somehow means no responsibility. The ambiguity isn't accidental. It's designed to prevent the kind of clear attribution that leads to consequences. Ambiguous accountability. The deliberate maintenance of unclear responsibility structures to avoid individual culpability. It's organizational in large systems. Interpersonal in relationships. But the function is the same. Keep attribution fuzzy. Make it hard to identify who decided what. Who knew what. Who was supposed to do what. And in that fuzziness, when things go wrong, blame has nowhere to land. Corporate structures exploit this systematically. Decisions get made in meetings. Multiple people present. No single person clearly in charge. When the decision proves costly, accountability fragments. It was a team decision. We all agreed. I raised concerns but was outvoted. The ambiguity was built into the process. Intentionally. So that when things failed, no individual could be held fully responsible. Projects fail this way constantly. Timelines weren't met. Budgets were exceeded. Quality suffered. Who's accountable? The project manager. They'll point to resource constraints. The team leads. They'll point to unclear requirements. The executives. They'll point to unforeseen circumstances. Each person has a partial explanation. None accepts full responsibility. The accountability is ambiguous, distributed across the system, and therefore effectively nowhere. Relationships create ambiguous accountability in subtler ways. Decisions about the relationship get made through drift, not explicit conversation. Nobody clearly commits. Nobody clearly objects. Things just happen, or don't happen. And later, When there's a problem, accountability can't be assigned. I thought you were handling it, Bort. I assumed you knew. One never really decided. The ambiguity protects both people from blame. But it also prevents correction. Because if no one's responsible, no one needs to change. What makes ambiguous accountability persistent is how it reduces risk. Taking clear responsibility means accepting clear consequences. Ambiguity reduces that exposure, spreads it thin, makes it survivable, and because systems reward risk avoidance, ambiguous structures proliferate. Reporting lines get complicated, decision processes get collective, ownership gets shared. Each layer of complexity adds ambiguity, and each addition makes accountability harder to enforce. The cost is systemic. When accountability is ambiguous, problems don't get fixed. Because fixing requires someone taking ownership. And ownership means responsibility, which the system is designed to avoid. So failures repeat, mistakes compound, and everyone involved can point to the ambiguity as protection. It's not my job. That's outside my scope. We share that responsibility. Each statement technically true, each functionally an evasion. The trap closes at scale. The more ambiguous the accountability, the more people rely on it. And the more they rely on it, the more the system resists clarification. Because clarifying accountability means reducing protection, making consequences possible. And no one wants to be the person clearly responsible when they've been operating in a system designed around diffusion. So the ambiguity persists, gets defended, becomes culture, until the organization or relationship is structured entirely around avoiding clear attribution. And in that structure, genuine accountability becomes impossible. Not because people are avoiding it individually, because the system is designed to prevent it entirely.